Hey there, welcome to Broaderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Echoes in the library. Have you ever wondered what lingers in the places we leave behind? What if the walls of an old building could remember more than just history? What if they remembered us? It was a late autumn evening when I found myself standing at the entrance of the old public library, a building that had been part of my town for as long as I could remember. I hadn't been inside for years, not since they built the new library on the other side of town. But there was something about the old place that always pulled me back, its towering brick facade, the large windows that seemed to watch you, and the heavy, oak doors that groaned as if they didn't want to be opened. The town had tried to sell the building off many times after the library moved, but no buyer ever stuck around long enough to sign the papers. Some claimed the foundation was bad, others mentioned structural issues, but there were always rumors about the librarian who had worked there for over years. Her name was Martha Wilkins, a woman known for her strict adherence to the rules. The legend goes that she died unexpectedly late one night while working, clutching a stack of returned books in her arms. No one had heard from her for days until they found her collapsed near the car catalog, her heart apparently giving out from years of overwork. Some said her spirit never left the library, that she continued to guard the books she had so meticulously cared for. But those were just stories, right? Still, as I pushed the creaky door open and stepped inside, I felt a chill settle over me, as if the building itself was exhaling after a long breath. The air smelled of musty paper and old wood, the way you'd expect any forgotten place to smell. Dust floated through the slivers of moonlight streaming in from the high windows. The silence was almost comforting, almost. I had come back to see if the rumors were true. The town planned to demolish the old place by the end of the month, but whispers about strange happenings had started up again. People claimed to have seen lights flickering inside at night, shadows moving behind the windows even though no one was supposed to be there. Some swore they heard the sound of pages turning and books being shelved. I was skeptical. I had never believed in ghosts or spirits, but part of me couldn't resist the curiosity. Besides, if I didn't check it out, the library would be gone soon, and with it, the stories it held. I wandered through the main room, my footsteps echoing off the marble floor. Dust covered the shelves, the once proud rows of books now abandoned and forgotten. A few stray volumes still lay scattered across the tables, left behind by the last patrons who never returned. Suddenly, I heard it, something faint, like the rustling of paper or the soft whisper of fabric brushing against the ground. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. The noise had come from the far corner of the room, near the old car catalog where they said Martha had died. I laughed nervously at myself. It was probably just a draft, I thought. Old buildings made strange noises, after all. But then I heard it again, this time, clearer. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, shuffling across the floor toward me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. No answer. I waited a moment longer, listening. Nothing. Shaking off the creeping unease, I made my way to the back of the library, past rows of empty shelves and long-abandoned study tables. The farther I went, the colder the air became, as if the temperature was dropping with every step I took. I reached the old reference section, where the bookshelves stood taller than anywhere else, casting long, eerie shadows in the fading light. As I approached the back wall, I noticed something strange. One of the shelves appeared slightly ajar, as if it had been pulled away from the wall. Curious, I reached out and gave it a gentle tug. To my surprise, the entire shelf moved with ease, revealing a hidden doorway behind it. For a moment, I hesitated. There were no stories about hidden limbs in the library, at least none that I had ever heard. But then again, old buildings like this were full of secrets. Taking a deep breath, I stepped through the opening, the wooden floor creaking beneath my feet as I entered the dark, narrow corridor beyond. The air was thick here, heavier than in the main room, and the smell of dampness hung in the air. I fumbled for my phone, using its weak light to guide me forward. The corridor was lined with more bookshelves, but these were different, older, dustier. Many of the books were missing their covers or had pages torn out, as if they had been forgotten long before the rest of the library. I hadn't gone more than a few feet when I heard the sound again, closer this time. It was unmistakable now, footsteps, coming from somewhere behind me. My pulse quickened, and I spun around, the phone's light cutting through the darkness. But there was nothing there. Is someone here? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Again, no answer. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were closer now, just behind me, moving at an even, slow pace, as if whoever, or whatever it was, didn't care if I heard them. I started to walk faster, my heart pounding in my chest, the narrow hallway closing in around me. The footsteps quickened to match my pace, and now I could hear something else, a faint whisper, like the sound of someone reading softly to themselves, just on the edge of hearing. I broke into a run, my footsteps slamming against the wooden floor as I rushed toward the end of the corridor. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, as if multiple voices were speaking at once, but none of them clear enough to understand. Just as I reached the end of the hallway, I tripped over something, a pile of books stacked haphazardly in the middle of the floor. I crashed to the ground, my phone flying from my hand and skidding across the floor, its light flickering as it spun out of reach. The whispers stopped. For a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing as I lay there, too afraid to move. Then, from the darkness ahead of me, I heard a voice that was cold, distant, but unmistakable. You're not supposed to be here. My visit to the library had taken an unsettling turn, but instead of retreating to the safety of my apartment, I found myself drawn back the following evening. Something about the old place, despite its decay, ignited a dangerous curiosity within me. Maybe it was the eerie beauty of the place, the feeling that history itself clung to its very walls. Or maybe it was something deeper, a dark pull that I couldn't fully explain. That night, the wind howled through the streets as if warning me against returning. Yet, I ignored it. With my coat pulled tight against the chill, I made my way once again to the library. As I approached the front steps, the building seemed even more imposing in the night. The windows, dark and lifeless, reflected none of the streetlights but seemed instead to absorb the very light from the world around them. Inside, I half expected to see the same strange figure from the night before, but the room was empty. The light from my flashlight swept across the walls and shelves, but everything seemed undisturbed. I stepped further in, trying to shake the growing unease building in my chest. The silence was almost unbearable. It pressed in on me from all sides, thick and oppressive, as though the air itself carried the weight of thousands of unsaid words. The only sound was the echo of my footsteps, which reverberated off the high ceilings and empty shelves, amplifying every creak and shuffle into something ominous. I ventured deeper into the back of the library, where the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. My flashlight flickered briefly, and I cursed under my breath, smacking it against my palm to steady the light. but the brief moment of darkness sent a shiver up my spine. I could have sworn I saw a figure just out of the corner of my eye, standing among the rows of books. But when the light returned, there was nothing. "Hello?" My voice felt small in the vastness of the place, swallowed by the weight of the silence. No response. I told myself I was being foolish, letting my imagination get the better of me. But there was something about this library, something about the air that was different from any other place I'd ever been. I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. I passed by a set of books that were so old their spines were disintegrating, reduced to little more than dust. I reached out to brush the dust from one of the shelves, and my hand grazed something cool and metallic. My heart skipped a beat. There, tucked behind a pile of old books, was an antique key. Its design was intricate, the kind of craftsmanship that hadn't been seen for decades, maybe centuries. Instinctively, I slipped the key into my pocket, though I wasn't sure why. It felt like a key to something important, something hidden. My mind raced with possibilities, a secret room, a hidden collection, or maybe even some long-forgotten diary of a mysterious librarian. As I straightened up, the sound of a whisper brushed against my ear. I froze. The whisper was faint, barely discernible, but it was there, a soft voice that seemed to come from behind me. I turned quickly, shining my flashlight toward the source of the sound. The beam illuminated only empty shelves and dust motes swirling in the air. But I knew I had heard it. A moment later, the whisper came again, clearer this time. "Leave." My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a request. It was a command, dripping with cold, undeniable authority. My heart pounded in my chest, and my legs trembled as though they were ready to bolt at any second. Still, I didn't leave. Something kept me rooted to the spot, some strange force compelling me to stay. Another whisper followed, even closer now. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, my flashlight scanning the area frantically. My pulse raced as the light flickered again, leaving me in total darkness for a brief, terrifying moment. When the light returned, my heart nearly stopped. A figure stood at the far end of the room, cloaked in shadows, just barely visible. The air around them shimmered as if distorted by heat, but the room was freezing cold. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by some forgotten piece of furniture. But then the figure took a step forward. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking in my hand. "Who are you?" My voice came out barely louder than a whisper. The figure stopped, hovering near the entrance to the hallway that led deeper into the library. I could see no face, no defining features, just a dark silhouette wrapped in shadow. Then, with a raspy, barely audible voice, it spoke. "Leave, now." The finality in its tone was chilling. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a threat. Suddenly, the air felt too thick to breathe. I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples, the cold sweat forming on my back. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out before it was too late. But I couldn't move. Something about the figure held me captive, rooted to the spot like a deer caught in headlights. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. The oppressive weight in the room lifted slightly, but the sense of danger remained. I had overstayed my welcome. I backed away slowly, my heart still racing, but I couldn't resist one last look toward the hallway where the figure had stood. Something caught my eye, a faint, flickering light further down the corridor. It wasn't my flashlight, and it wasn't the streetlights outside. It was coming from within the library, some were deeper, perhaps behind that locked door I had never been able to open. The key in my pocket felt heavier than before. I hesitated for a moment, weighing my options. Logic told me to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. But curiosity, that same dangerous curiosity that had brought me here in the first place, urged me to stay, to find out what was hidden within the depths of the library. With a shaky breath, I tightened my grip on the flashlight and started walking toward the source of the light. The hallway seemed longer than before. The flickering light at the far end beckoned me forward, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. Every step I took echoed unnervingly in the stillness, the sound bouncing off the ancient, dust-laden bookshelves like the last gasps of forgotten voices. I reached the end of the hallway, where a heavy wooden door stood, the same one I had tried to open on previous visits, but to no avail. This time, though, I had the key. My fingers trembled as I pulled it from my pocket. Its cold surface felt almost alive, pulsating with a faint, otherworldly energy. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease. I hesitated, feeling a deep sense of foreboding as I prepared to turn it. Was this really what I wanted? Behind this door lay secrets older than I could comprehend, secrets that perhaps should remain buried. But something compelled me forward, some dark part of me craving answers, no matter the cost. With a soft click, the door unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. Beyond the threshold, there was a small, dimly lit room. It looked nothing like the rest of the library. The walls were made of stone, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew and age. A single oil lamp flickered on a table in the center of the room, casting long, sinister shadows across the floor. In the middle of the room, there was a pedestal. And on that pedestal lay a book, large, ancient, its cover worn and cracked with age. Strange symbols adorned the cover, ones I didn't recognize, but that seemed to stir something deep within me, a memory long forgotten or perhaps never known. I stepped closer, drawn to the book as though it had a will of its own, pulling me toward it. The room grew colder with every step I took, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe as though they were alive. Yet I couldn't stop. My hand reached out, almost of its own accord, and I placed it on the cover of the book. As soon as my skin made contact, the room seemed to shift. The air grew heavy, and the flickering light of the lamp dimmed, casting the room into near darkness. A low, rumbling sound filled the space, like distant thunder or the growl of some unseen creature. I pulled my hand back in alarm, but it was too late. The book began to open on its own, the pages flipping rapidly as though some invisible force was reading it. The symbols on the pages glowed faintly, casting a sickly green light that illuminated the room in an eerie glow. Then, the whispers began again. But this time, they were louder, more insistent, as though they were coming from all around me. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet the meaning was clear: you are not prepared. I stepped back, my heart racing. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, until they were deafening. The room spun, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. But then, just as suddenly as they had begun, the whispers stopped. The book lay open on the pedestal, its pages still glowing faintly. But now, instead of strange symbols, there were words written in a language I could understand: English. The words on the page were a warning, etched into the very fabric of reality. The one who opens this door will face the wrath of those who slumber. Their dreams will become your nightmares. Their power will become your curse. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. What had I done? What had I unleashed? The words on the page blurred, and for a moment I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of dread. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls shifting, moving as though alive. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was the same figure I had seen before, cloaked in darkness, its form barely discernible. But this time, it spoke clearly, its voice a cold whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. "You have opened the door," it said. "Now you must face the consequences." I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. What are you?" The figure stepped closer, and for the first time, I saw its face, or what was left of it. It was pale, almost translucent, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare into my very soul. "I am the guardian of this place," it said, "and you have trespassed into the realm of the forgotten." I backed away, my mind racing. "I didn't mean to. I was looking for answers." The figure smiled, a cold, cruel smile. "Answers? There are no answers here, only more questions. And now that you have opened the door, you are bound to this place. You cannot leave." I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway as I fled the room. But no matter how fast I ran, the shadows seemed to follow, twisting and writhing like living creatures. The whispers returned, louder now, more insistent, filling my mind with dread. I burst through the front doors of the library, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. But even outside, the whispers followed, their voices a constant reminder of what I had done. I had opened the door. And now, there was no going back. I stumbled away from the library, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I ran down the empty streets of the town. The night was still, far too quiet, and the streetlights flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to mock me. The whispers were gone, at least for the moment, but the sense of dread clung to me like a second skin. What had I done? The key in my pocket felt heavier than ever, like it was burning a hole through the fabric of my coat. I wanted to throw it away, to rid myself of the cursed thing, but some part of me knew it wouldn't be that simple. I had opened the door, and now I was bound to the library in ways I didn't yet understand. I reached my apartment in record time, slamming the door behind me and locking it twice. My hands were shaking as I leaned against the door, my mind racing. I needed to think, to figure out what was happening. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the facts remained. I had seen something beyond explanation, and now I was part of it. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whispers. Faint, just at the edge of my consciousness, like a distant radio signal I couldn't quite tune out. And worse, I felt a presence in my room, something watching me from the shadows, just out of sight. Every time I opened my eyes, there was nothing there. But I knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before it revealed itself. The next morning, I woke up feeling more exhausted than when I had gone to bed. Dark circles had formed under my eyes, and my hands still shook as I tried to drink my coffee. I couldn't stay here. I had to figure out what was happening before it consumed me entirely. I spent the next few hours at the town's new library, poring over old records and newspaper clippings, looking for anything that could explain the strange events at the old library. Most of the articles were about its construction in the late 19th century and its role as the town's main source of knowledge for decades. There was no mention of anything unusual, no mysterious deaths, no haunting tales. But then I found it. An old article, buried deep in the archives, about the death of a librarian named Martha Wilkins. The date was from over years ago, around the same time the town had begun construction on the new library. According to the article, Martha had been found dead in the library late one night, clutching a book in her hands. The cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but the article mentioned that many of her colleagues have reported strange occurrences in the library leading up to her death, books disappearing and reappearing in strange places, lights flickering for no reason, and whispers that could be heard late at night. It was the same story I had heard growing up, the one everyone dismissed as a local legend. But now, I knew there was more to it. Martha Wilkins hadn't just died in that library. She had become part of it. I sat back in my chair, the realization sinking in. The figure I had seen, the one who had spoken to me, it had been her. Martha Wilkins, the long-dead librarian, still guarding her books even after death. But why? Why had she remained behind, trapped in that place? And more importantly, why had she targeted me? I didn't have long to dwell on the questions. As I sat there, surrounded by the dusty pages of history, I felt it again, the cold, suffocating presence of something watching me. The whispers returned, louder this time, echoing in my mind like 1,000 voices speaking all at once. You cannot escape. I shot up from my chair, knocking over a stack of books in my haste to leave. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as I stumbled out of the library and into the bright afternoon sunlight. But even outside, they followed me, clinging to my every thought. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the old library once again, its dark, imposing silhouette looming against the sky. I had no choice now. The key in my pocket felt like a lead weight, dragging me back to the very place I had tried to escape. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was colder than ever, the shadows longer and darker, as though the building itself had changed in my absence. The whispers were louder here, filling every corner of the room, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I made my way to the back of the library, where the hidden doorway stood, its wooden frame slightly ajar. The book was still there, open on the pedestal, its pages glowing faintly in the dim light. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The words on the page had changed. No longer a warning, they were now a demand. Return what you have taken. I didn't understand. I hadn't taken anything, at least nothing of value. But then my hand brushed against the key in my pocket, and I realized what it meant. The key. It wasn't just a key, it was the reason I was being haunted, the reason the whispers wouldn't leave me alone. With a deep breath, I pulled the key from my pocket and placed it on the book. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the room began to shake. The walls trembled, the floor buckled beneath my feet, and the whispers grew into a deafening roar. I stumbled back, my eyes wide with terror as the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing like a swarm of snakes. The book snapped shut, the key disappearing into its pages. The shaking stopped, the whispers faded, and the room fell deathly silent. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. The library was quiet again, as if the very life had been sucked out of it. I turned to leave, but as I reached the doorway, a voice whispered in my ear, soft and menacing. You are not free. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The key was gone, but the curse remained. I had returned what I had taken, but I knew deep down that the library had not let me go. I was still bound to it, in ways I couldn't yet understand. As I stepped outside into the fading daylight, the weight of the curse settled over me like a heavy cloak. I had escaped the library, but I knew it would never truly leave me. Its whispers would follow me for the rest of my life, haunting me in every shadow, in every quiet moment. The door to the old library creaked shut behind me, but I knew it wouldn't stay closed for long. One day, it would call me back. And this time, I might not be able to escape. Days passed, but the weight of the library's curse never left me. I tried to return to my normal life, but every night, the whispers crept back into my mind, growing louder with each passing day. The shadows in my apartment twisted in strange ways, and sometimes, when I glanced at my reflection, I saw something standing behind me, something I couldn't explain. I avoided the old library as best I could. I wanted nothing more than to forget about that place, to bury the memories deep within my mind. But the townspeople wouldn't let me. Everywhere I went, I heard the rumors spreading, whispers about lights flickering in the windows again, about shadows moving behind the dusty shelves. And then, the accidents began. It started small, people falling downstairs, misplaced books reappearing in odd places. But soon, the incidents grew more dangerous. A woman disappeared after entering the library late one night. Her car was found parked outside, but there was no trace of her inside the building. Another man was found unconscious at the foot of the steps, muttering incoherently about shadows and voices. The town was starting to panic. They spoke of the curse in hushed tones, their eyes filled with fear. And they all looked to me for answers, as if I had somehow become the library's keeper, the one who held its secrets. But I had no answers. Only fear. It wasn't long before the mayor announced that the old library would be demolished. The decision came too late for the people who had been affected, but there was a strange sense of relief in the air. The town believed that once the library was gone, the curse would be lifted. I wasn't so sure. The night before the demolition, I found myself standing in front of the library again, staring up at its dark, imposing figure. The memories of what had happened inside flooded back, the whispers, the shadows, the figure that had warned me to leave. I should have been relieved that the building would soon be gone, but instead, I felt a sense of unease. Destroying the building wouldn't destroy the curse. I knew that now. The library was merely a vessel, a gateway to something far more ancient, far more powerful than I could comprehend. The key was gone, but its legacy remained. As I stood there, lost in thought, I heard a soft rustling sound behind me. I turned quickly, half expecting to see the shadowy figure from before. But there was no one there. The street was empty, silent except for the wind. I turned back to the library, but this time, something was different. The windows, which had always been dark and lifeless, were now glowing faintly. A soft, warm light flickered inside, like the glow of a candle. And then, for the briefest moment, I saw her. Martha Wilkins. She stood in one of the windows, her figure barely visible through the dust and grime. Her eyes locked onto mine, and in that instant, I understood. She wasn't haunting the library out of malice or spite. She was protecting it. But from what? Before I could process the thought, the light in the window flickered out, and she was gone. The library stood as silent and foreboding as ever, but I knew it wouldn't be for long. The next morning, I woke to the sound of demolition crews preparing to tear down the building. I stood at a distance, watching as they set up their equipment, the rumble of machinery filling the air. The mayor stood nearby, supervising the process with a sense of grim determination. As the first wrecking ball swung toward the old building, I felt a knot form in my stomach. The ball collided with the brick wall, sending a cloud of dust into the air. But something strange happened. The library didn't collapse. The bricks cracked and splintered, but the building remained standing. The wrecking crew hesitated, confused. They swung the ball again, harder this time, but the result was the same. The building seemed to resist, its walls refusing to crumble. Then, the ground began to shake. It started as a low rumble, barely noticeable at first. But soon, the shaking grew more violent, the earth beneath the library quaking as though something beneath it was waking up. People screamed and scattered, running for safety as the ground cracked open around the building. And then, before my eyes, the library began to sink. The ground swallowed it whole, brick by brick, until there was nothing left but a gaping hole where the building had once stood. The dust settled, and the town fell into a stunned silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, from the depths of the earth, a sound emerged. A whisper. It was faint, barely audible, but I knew that voice. It was the same voice that had haunted me for weeks, the same voice that had warned me to leave. You are not free. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. But no matter how far I went, I knew the truth. The library was gone, but the curse remained. And now, it was bound to me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the curse hadn't ended with the library's destruction. In fact, it felt stronger, more present, like the library had merely been a doorway, one that was now wide open. The town returned to normal in the days following the demolition, but I knew better. People stopped talking about the library, stopped worrying about the strange occurrences that had plagued them. They believed the nightmare was over. But I felt it everywhere. In the shadows that lingered too long, in the cold whispers that brushed against my ear in the dead of night. I tried to move on, but my nights were plagued by terrible dreams. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my mind racing with visions of the library. In my dreams, it was always the same. I would stand before the gaping hole where the building had once stood, and from within, something would call to me. A voice, soft and distant, urging me to return. And every time I awoke, I would hear it. The whisper. You are not free. I avoided the sight of the library as much as I could, but the dreams became more intense, more frequent. It was as if something was pulling me back, dragging me closer to the edge of madness. I didn't know how long I could hold out before I caved. It was about 2 weeks after the demolition when the final push came. That night, the dream was different. I stood at the edge of the pit, staring into the darkness below, but this time I could see something. A faint glow, deep within the earth, as though something was stirring far beneath the surface. And from that glow, the whispers came, louder, clearer, more insistent than ever before. You must return. When I woke, I knew what I had to do. The side of the old library was quiet when I arrived. The construction crew had begun filling in the hole, but they had made little progress. The gaping chasm still yawned in the center of the town, an open wound in the earth. I stood at the edge, staring down into the darkness below, my heart racing. The key was gone, the library was gone, but the curse remained. And if I was ever going to be free, I had to face it. With a deep breath, I climbed down into the pit, my feet slipping on the loose dirt as I descended into the darkness. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and every step I took felt like it was dragging me deeper into something I couldn't escape. The whispers grew louder as I descended, echoing off the walls of the pit, filling my mind with dread. When I reached the bottom, I could see it, the faint glow I had seen in my dreams. It was coming from a small opening at the far end of the pit, a narrow tunnel that led deep into the earth. I hesitated for a moment, but the whispers urged me on. I crawled through the opening, the walls of the tunnel pressing in on me from all sides. The air grew colder, more oppressive, as I made my way deeper underground. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came in ragged gasps as I forced myself to keep moving. After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened up into a vast underground chamber. The walls were made of stone, ancient and covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal lay a book. The same book I had seen in the library. I stepped closer, my heart racing. The whispers were deafening now, filling the chamber with their insistent call. As I approached the book, I could feel the weight of the curse bearing down on me, suffocating me with its presence. But I couldn't stop. I had come too far. With trembling hands, I reached out and touched the cover of the book. The whispers stopped. For a moment, the chamber was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Then, slowly, the book began to open. The pages flipped on their own, moving faster and faster until they settled on a single page. The words were written in the same strange symbols I had seen before, but this time I understood them. They spoke of an ancient power, one that had been sealed away beneath the earth long ago. The library had been built to contain it, to keep it from escaping. But with the library gone, the power had been set free. And now, it was looking for a new host. As I read the words, I felt something shift in the air. The ground beneath my feet trembled, and the walls of the chamber seemed to close in around me. The whispers returned, but this time they were inside my head, filling my mind with their insidious presence. "You are the key." I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The air grew thick, suffocating, as the power of the curse wrapped itself around me like a vice. The book glowed brighter, its pages turning once more, and I could feel something pulling me toward it. I tried to fight it, tried to resist, but it was no use. The power of the curse was too strong. It pulled me closer and closer until I was standing over the book once more. And then, with a final, deafening whisper, it consumed me. I don't know how long I was trapped in that chamber. Days? Weeks? Time lost all meaning as I was drawn deeper into the curse. The whispers became my constant companions, their voices filling my mind, twisting my thoughts, warping my reality. And then, one day, I woke up. I was standing at the edge of the pit, staring down into the darkness below. The town was quiet, the streets empty. The pit had been filled in, the library gone, but the curse remained. I was free, but I wasn't the same. The whispers still haunted me, but now they were quieter, more distant. I could feel the curse inside me, a part of me, waiting for the right moment to resurface. I knew that I was no longer bound to the library, but I was bound to something far older, far more dangerous. And one day, it would return. A demonic double. Have you ever felt that someone was watching you, even when you were alone? It started as a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. I'd been sitting on the couch in my modest apartment, the golden glow of the setting sun filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening, with the hum of the city fading into the background, my mind lost in thoughts of the day's mundane tasks. But then, a sudden chill washed over me, a feeling that pricked at the edges of my consciousness. I glanced up, heart racing slightly, but nothing was amiss. Just the empty hallway leading to my bedroom. I shook my head, attributing the sensation to the stress of work and the loneliness that often accompany my evenings. After all, who wouldn't feel a twinge of paranoia when living alone? But that night, as I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. It was me, but something was off. The reflection smirked back at me, a knowing smile that felt alien, unsettling. I rubbed my eyes, blinking hard, convincing myself that fatigue was playing tricks. I turned away, dismissing the feeling as an illusion, and slid into the comfort of my sheets. Sleep came slowly, wrapped in layers of anxiety. I tossed and turned, haunted by fragments of dreams where shadows chased me through darkened streets. Each time I caught a glimpse of my pursuer, it was the same, an indistinct figure with an eerie resemblance to me, yet twisted in a way that sent shivers down my spine. When morning finally broke, I awoke drenched in sweat, the remnants of those nightmares lingering like a thick fog in my mind. Shaking off the sense of dread, I forced myself into the day's routine, but as I moved about my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Days turned into weeks, each morning marked by that same unsettling sensation. My reflection grew bolder, lurking just behind me when I least expected it. I'd catch it in the mirror, grinning in ways I couldn't comprehend, mimicking my every gesture but with a sinister twist. I began to question my sanity. Was I losing my grip on reality? I confided in my friend Sarah over coffee, trying to dismiss my fears as mere stress. "You're just imagining things," she said, her laughter ringing through the cafe. "Maybe you need a break, a vacation, or something." Her words were meant to comfort, yet they only deepened my unease. Could it be that my mind was playing tricks? Or was something more sinister at play? As the weeks went by, the encounters with my doppelganger intensified. I'd wake in the dead of night, heart pounding, only to find the figure standing at the foot of my bed, watching. Every time I blinked, it seemed to inch closer, its smile widening, teeth glinting in the dim light. I'd sit up, gasping, and the moment I did, it would vanish, leaving only the echoes of my racing heart. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at work, I decided to confront the fear head-on. I stood before the mirror, staring deep into my own eyes. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. For a moment, the silence hung thick in the air. Then, in the stillness, I could have sworn I heard a soft chuckle, a low, menacing sound that sent chills down my spine. "I want to be free," it replied, the words not from my lips but resonating in the air around me. I stumbled back, my heart racing as I processed the impossibility of it all. This wasn't just a figment of my imagination, something was truly wrong. I needed help, but from whom? Who could understand this dark reflection that had begun to haunt my every moment? As I retreated to my bed that night, exhaustion heavy upon me, I felt the familiar chill of dread wash over me. My eyes fluttered shut, and I hoped to escape the tormenting visions, but the sensation of being watched never left. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The following days slipped into a strange haze of anxiety and dread. I found myself avoiding mirrors, steering clear of any reflective surfaces that might reveal the dark truth lurking behind my own face. I began to feel like a prisoner in my own home, my once safe haven now a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. Each creak of the floorboards seemed to echo with the laughter of my doppelganger, a constant reminder of my unraveling sanity. I tried to distract myself with work, pouring every ounce of energy into my projects. But even the busy office became a breeding ground for paranoia. In meetings, I often caught my colleagues glancing at me with strange expressions, their eyes lingering for just a second too long. Was it my imagination, or were they aware of something I wasn't? The isolation tightened around me, squeezing out the last remnants of comfort. One Friday evening, I found myself sitting on my couch, flipping through the channels, but unable to focus. The hum of the television became background noise, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. I needed to take control before this darkness consumed me entirely. I resolved to seek help, to talk to a therapist about what I was experiencing. I made an appointment for the following week, but that night, as I lay in bed, I felt the familiar chill creeping over me again. My breath hitched in my throat as I felt a presence in the room, a heavy weight that pressed down on my chest. I glanced at the clock, 2 a.m., and then turned my gaze to the corner where the shadows gathered thickest. There it stood, the doppelganger, grinning wider than ever, its eyes glinting like shards of ice. "You can't run from me," it taunted, the voice like a whisper curling around my spine. "We are one and the same. You can't escape yourself." Panic surged through me, and I leaped from my bed, sprinting down the hall and throwing myself into the safety of my bathroom. I slammed the door behind me, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I leaned against the cold tile wall, gasping for air, desperately trying to gather my thoughts. What was this creature? Was it a manifestation of my inner demons, my fears brought to life? I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I splashed cold water on my face, hoping to shock myself back to clarity. As I stared into the bathroom mirror, I caught sight of it again, hovering just behind my shoulder, its eyes boring into me. I whirled around, but the space behind me was empty. The reflection, however, grinned back, lips curled in a mocking smile. I was trapped in a nightmare with no end in sight. Days passed, each blending into the next, marked only by the relentless encounters with my doppelganger. I canceled my therapy appointment, convinced that no one could possibly understand what I was experiencing. Isolation became my constant companion, feeding into the paranoia that gnawed at my sanity. Then, one evening, in a desperate attempt to reclaim my life, I ventured out for a walk. The streets were alive with the sounds of laughter and music, people enjoying their Friday night. I envied their normalcy, their ability to move through life without the weight of fear pressing down on them. As I walked through the neighborhood, I tried to lose myself in the crowd, to feel a sense of belonging. But just as I began to relax, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a shop window. There it was, the doppelganger, standing just behind me, its expression twisted in delight. My stomach lurched, and I hurried away, heart racing, the laughter of the crowd fading into the background. That night, I returned home, desperate to escape the nightmare, only to find the figure waiting for me again, this time in the hallway. "You can't avoid me forever," it taunted, stepping closer, its movements smooth and fluid, as if gliding through the air. "You belong to me now." I stumbled back, fear gripping my heart. I needed to understand what was happening, to confront this darkness before it consumed me whole. That's when I remembered an old journal, tucked away in a dusty box in my closet. It contained stories of strange occurrences, local legends of doppelgangers and dark figures that haunted those who strayed too close to their own reflections. Fueled by a mixture of fear and determination, I pulled the box out from the depths of my closet. Dust motes danced in the light as I flipped through the pages, my fingers trembling. The stories spoke of individuals who encountered their doubles and were never seen again. The idea that I could be the next victim sent chills down my spine. Then, I found a passage that caught my eye. To confront a doppelganger, one must face the truths they wish to hide. The words resonated with me. If I wanted to escape this nightmare, I had to confront whatever dark secrets lay buried within me. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a decision. I would not let fear control me any longer. I would face my doppelganger, look it in the eyes, and demand to understand what it wanted. The next morning, the sun peeked through the curtains, casting a warm glow across my room. I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me, a determination to reclaim my life. But deep down, I knew that confronting my doppelganger would be the most difficult challenge yet. With a newfound resolve, I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. I had spent the day gathering information, scouring old folklore and local legends about doppelgangers and the darkness that surrounded them. The stories told of those who had encountered their doubles, of the terrifying fates that awaited those who didn't confront their shadows. It was a haunting revelation that both frightened and steeled my nerves. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, I set the stage for the encounter. I dimmed the lights in my apartment, creating a shadowy atmosphere that mirrored the weight pressing on my chest. I sat on the floor, facing the full-length mirror in the living room, my heart pounding in my ears. "Show yourself," I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt. The room fell silent, the only sound my breath quickening as I awaited the arrival of my tormentor. Moments passed, each one stretching into eternity. Then, just as I began to doubt my courage, the air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. My reflection began to shimmer, the edges blurring until it coalesced into a figure. There it stood, my doppelganger, eyes glinting with malice, its smile wider than ever. "You've finally come to play," it purred, stepping forward. "I've been waiting for you. What do you want?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. The creature moved with an uncanny grace, mimicking my every gesture but with an unsettling twist. I felt a chill wrap around me, as if the very air had turned to ice. "I want what you've denied for so long," it replied, its voice like gravel scraping against metal. "I want you to embrace the darkness within you." "What darkness?" I shot back, my resolve wavering. "I'm not like you." "Ah, but you are," it grinned, eyes narrowing. "You pretend to be someone you're not, hiding behind a mask of normalcy. You think you can escape me, but you can't escape yourself." With those words, a flood of memories washed over me, moments of shame, guilt, and fear. Times when I felt unworthy, when I had hidden my true self behind a facade of pleasantry and smiles. It was true, I had built walls around my vulnerabilities, refusing to acknowledge the parts of me that felt broken. As I struggled with these emotions, my doppelganger stepped closer, invading my space. "You think you can fight me? You're only prolonging the inevitable. I am you, and you are me. We are bound together, inseparable." I clenched my fists, anger flaring within me. "No. I refuse to accept this. I will not be consumed by you." With that, I lunged forward, crashing against the mirror, determined to confront the figure that had tormented me for so long. But instead of shattering glass, I felt a strange warmth envelop me, pulling me deeper into the reflection. The world around me warped, colors blending into a swirl of chaos. Suddenly, I was no longer in my living room. I found myself in a dark, distorted version of my own life, my apartment twisted into a nightmarish landscape, shadows lurking in every corner. My doppelganger stood before me, now towering and grotesque, a mocking smile stretching from ear to ear. "Welcome to my realm," it sneered, arms wide, inviting me into this darkness. "Here, we can finally be free of those suffocating masks you wear." Fear clawed at my throat, but I felt something else rising within me, a defiance I hadn't known I possessed. "I won't let you take me," I shouted, the words echoing in this twisted version of my reality. The creature's laughter reverberated around me, a sound filled with contempt. "You think you can resist? You're already mine. This is just the beginning." As I took a step back, the shadows surged forward, attempting to grasp at me. I remembered the stories of those who faced their doppelgangers, who had succumbed to their darker selves. I refused to become another cautionary tale. "You don't define me," I screamed, channeling every ounce of strength into my voice. "I will not be your prisoner." In that moment, I focused on the truth within me, the parts one had buried in shame and fear. I recalled the times I had overcome struggles, the moments of clarity that illuminated my path. I was more than my fears. I was a tapestry of experiences, both good and bad. The shadows hesitated, flickering as if caught in a gust of wind. I stepped forward, the darkness pushing against me, but I pressed on. "I embrace all that I am," I declared, feeling the warmth of self-acceptance swell within me. With each word, the figure recoiled, its smile faltering. "No! This isn't how it's supposed to go," it shrieked, the once alluring facade cracking to reveal a darker, more chaotic presence. The room trembled around me, mirrors shattering, light pouring in where darkness once reigned. I continued to confront the doppelganger, recognizing it as a reflection of my fears and insecurities, a part of me that sought control through terror. "I reject you," I shouted, my voice echoing with power. "You will not take me." The creature writhed, its form distorting as the light grew brighter, pushing back the shadows. I felt a surge of energy pulse through me, and with one final scream, the doppelganger shattered into a million fragments, dissolving into the air. I collapsed to the floor of my apartment, gasping for breath, the world around me settling back into place. The mirror stood intact, reflecting my weary but resolute face. I was still here, still me, but transformed. As I sat on the floor of my apartment, heart racing and breath coming in ragged gasps, the remnants of the confrontation echoed in my mind. I could still feel the weight of the doppelganger's presence, a shadow lingering at the edges of my thoughts. But now, it was different. I had faced my fears and emerged on the other side. Slowly, I pulled myself up, leaning against the wall for support. The room was quiet, the familiar hum of the city filtering in through the window, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just experienced. I glanced into the mirror, expecting to see some trace of the darkness that had nearly consumed me, but there was nothing, only my reflection, weary but resolute. In the days that followed, I struggled to process what had happened. I returned to my routine, but I felt different, as if I had shed a heavy layer of skin. The fear that had gripped me for weeks was no longer an ever-present weight. Instead, it had morphed into a quiet understanding of my own vulnerability. I recognized that embracing my fears was not a sign of weakness, but a necessary step toward healing. I resumed therapy, finally seeking the help I had once shunned. My therapist listened intently as I recounted the events of that night, her expression a mixture of concern and empathy. "It sounds like you experienced a significant internal struggle," she said gently. "Confronting our fears can be a terrifying yet transformative journey." As the weeks turned into months, I began to reconnect with the parts of myself I had neglected. I took up painting again, using vibrant colors to express emotions that had long been buried. Each brushstroke felt like a release, a way to externalize the turmoil within me. The canvas became a mirror reflecting my growth, my resilience. Yet, the memory of my doppelganger lingered, a reminder of the darkness that could resurface if I allowed fear to take root again. I learned to keep the lessons I had gleaned close to my heart, that vulnerability was not a weakness but a strength, that acknowledging my fears was the first step in disarming them. Then, one fateful evening, as I was preparing for bed, I caught a flicker of movement in the hallway. My heart raced, a familiar chill creeping over me. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the battles I had fought and won. The shadows danced along the walls, and for a moment I hesitated. But I would not be paralyzed by fear again. I stepped into the hallway, illuminated only by the dim light of the bedside lamp. As I reached the end of the corridor, I felt a familiar presence, the air thick with tension. This time, however, it was not the doppelganger that awaited me. Instead, I found a mirror leaning against the wall, a relic I had forgotten about. Its surface gleamed, reflecting not just my image, but the remnants of my journey, each scar, each triumph etched into the very fabric of my being. I approached it, heart pounding, the reflection revealing a woman who had faced her demons and emerged stronger. I could sense a presence lingering behind me, but instead of terror, I felt an odd sense of peace. "You're not my enemy," I whispered to the reflection, "but a part of me that deserves to be acknowledged." The shadows swirled, and for a fleeting moment, I saw my doppelganger again, not as a dark figure, but as a shadowy silhouette, almost protective. It no longer felt threatening, it felt like a reminder of the complexity of my existence. We were intertwined, bound together in this life of light and dark, fear and courage. "Thank you for teaching me," I murmured, a soft smile gracing my lips. The shadows seemed to bow before me, fading back into the depths of the mirror. The air around me lightened, and I felt a warm glow spreading within me. From that day forward, I learned to embrace my complexities. I understood that fear would always be a part of me, but it no longer held power over my life. I was not defined by my shadows, but by how I chose to navigate them. As I stood before the mirror, I recognized the truth. The battle was not over, but I was ready. I had taken the first step toward understanding myself, and in that moment, I felt free. A visit from hell. Have you ever felt a presence looming over you in the dark, one that whispers your name just as you are about to drift into sleep? It was a crisp autumn evening when the shadows began to creep into my life. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple as I sat in my living room, sipping a cup of herbal tea. The warmth of the tea contrasted sharply with the chill that seemed to seep through the cracks of my old, creaky house. I had always been a rational person, believing firmly in the laws of nature and the logic of the universe. But that night, as the wind howled outside, rattling the windows, I felt a deep unease settle in my stomach, a feeling that something was about to change. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a message from my sister, Sarah, asking if I wanted to join her for a family dinner the following weekend. I smiled at the thought of gathering with loved ones, but as I typed my response, I couldn't shake the feeling that I should decline. A nagging voice in the back of my mind urged me to stay home, to hide from whatever darkness was creeping closer. "Stop being silly," I muttered to myself, dismissing the thought. I hit send and watched the screen as the three little dots danced, indicating her reply. As I waited, I glanced around my living room, the familiar surroundings suddenly feeling foreign and eerie. The old family photographs lining the walls, once a source of comfort, now felt like eyes watching me. Then, my phone went silent. The anticipation built as I wondered what was taking her so long. My eyes flickered toward the window, and I noticed something strange in the shadows outside. It was a figure, obscured by the darkness, standing at the edge of my front yard. My heart raced as I tried to focus, but the fading light made it difficult to discern details. Was it a trick of the light? Or perhaps just my imagination playing tricks? Shaking off the apprehension, I stood up to draw the curtains, but as I approached the window, the figure vanished. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I chalked it up to the wind and brushed it off, but the atmosphere felt heavier, as if the air itself was thick with dread. As night enveloped the world outside, I decided to retreat to my bedroom. The familiar surroundings were supposed to be a safe haven, but as I settled into bed, I felt the weight of the darkness close in around me. The room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the soft glow of the bedside lamp, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. I pulled the covers tightly around me, willing myself to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I lay there, wide awake, my mind racing with thoughts. I replayed the day's events, searching for a reason for the growing unease that haunted me. I thought about the stories I had read, tales of restless spirits and demons lurking in the shadows, waiting for an unsuspecting soul. The thought was ludicrous, of course, yet the sensation of being watched lingered like an unwelcome guest. And then, as if summoned by my very fears, a whisper drifted through the silence. It was soft at first, barely audible, but as I strained to listen, it grew clearer, shaping into words, "It's time." My heart lurched, and I bolted upright in bed. The room felt colder now, the air thick with an unsettling presence. I glanced around, my pulse quickening, searching for the source of the voice. The shadows shifted, and I felt a chill wrap around me like an icy hand gripping my heart. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered, but then I saw it, the figure from earlier, standing at the foot of my bed. Its features were shrouded in darkness, but its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, piercing through the gloom. "Your time has come," it said, its voice echoing with a depth that sent waves of terror crashing over me. "I am here to collect what is owed." I wanted to scream, to flee, but fear paralyzed me. The weight of its gaze held me captive, and for a moment, I was caught between disbelief and horror. Who was this being? Why was it here? As I sat there, frozen, I remembered the stories of those who encountered messengers of death, tales of warnings and choices, of deals struck in the dark. The reality of my situation began to sink in, and I was acutely aware of the pulse of fear coursing through my veins. The figure stepped closer, the shadows swirling around it, whispering secrets in a language I couldn't understand. "You have ignored the signs, but I have come to remind you. It is time to face your past." I recoiled, feeling the weight of its words settle over me like a suffocating blanket. My past? What did it mean? I had always thought my life was unremarkable, filled with mundane moments. Yet, in that instant, I realized that I had never truly confronted my fears or the shadows that lurked in my memories. The figure loomed closer, its glowing eyes piercing through me, and in that moment, the walls of my reality began to dissolve. I felt a pull, a swirling vortex of memories and emotions, drawing me into a place where my deepest fears awaited. The figure extended a bony finger, pointing at something unseen. "Come with me. It is time to confront what you have buried." As I stared into the abyss of its eyes, a chilling thought crossed my mind. What if this was not just a visit from hell, but an invitation to explore the darkest corners of my soul? "Come with me," it urged again, its voice reverberating in my mind like a haunting melody. The command wrapped around me, tightening like a noose, and a profound dread settled in my chest. This was no ordinary encounter. I felt it in my bones. As the shadows coiled around the figure, I was compelled to step forward, drawn by an unseen force that blurred the line between fear and curiosity. "What do you want from me?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely a tremor against the weight of the darkness. The figure seemed to smile, though its face remained obscured. "To guide you through the paths you've avoided. To show you the truths you refuse to see." Suddenly, the air thickened with a cold mist that swirled around me, pulling me away from my bedroom and into an abyss of memories. I felt the ground shift beneath me, and before I could react, I was standing in a different place altogether, my childhood home. It looked just as I remembered, the faded wallpaper, the crooked picture frames, and the creaking floorboards that groaned under my weight. A wave of nostalgia crashed over me, mixed with a deeper, darker current of anxiety. I hadn't set foot in this house in years. The memories here were bittersweet, filled with laughter and warmth, but also shadows I had buried deep. The figure stood beside me, now more tangible, its outline flickering like a candle in the wind. "This is where it began," it said, gesturing towards the hallway. As I walked down the corridor, I felt the familiar chill of the past wash over me. I could almost hear the echoes of my childhood laughter mixed with the distant whispers of things I had tried to forget. The kitchen came into view, and I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I remembered the warmth of my mother's cooking, the way the sunlight poured through the windows, but I also remembered the arguments, the tension that would creep into the air like a storm brewing. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Because you cannot escape what you refuse to acknowledge. Face it, and you may find your way back." I stepped into the kitchen, the memories flooding back with a force that nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. I saw my younger self, bright-eyed and hopeful, sitting at the table while my parents argued in hushed tones, their faces tight with frustration. I could feel the energy shift, the tension crackling like electricity in the air. "Mom, why can't you just listen?" I heard my younger self plead, a voice filled with innocence and desperation. But the words were drowned out by the escalating chaos of adult voices. "Enough," my father's voice thundered, cutting through the air like a knife. "You don't understand." The figure loomed closer, its presence an unyielding weight beside me. "This is the root of your fears, the seed of your doubt. You have run from this pain, but it has followed you." Suddenly, the scene shifted again, and I was thrust into another memory, a different moment of conflict, but this time with friends in high school. I watched myself sitting alone at a lunch table, laughter ringing around me while I felt invisible, a ghost in my own life. I remembered the sharp pain of rejection, the whispers that curled around my heart, feeding my insecurities. "Do you see?" the figure asked, its voice a low murmur. "You have carried this weight for too long." I turned to the figure, frustration boiling within me. I didn't choose this. I didn't want to feel like this. My voice echoed in the empty kitchen, bouncing off the walls, but the figure remained calm, unyielding. "Perhaps not," it replied, "but you must confront it if you wish to break free." Before I could respond, another memory flooded in, a darker one. I was standing in a shadowy corner of the basement, the air thick with must and decay. I felt the cold grip of fear clench my heart as I recalled the night I stumbled upon a family secret, one that had been hidden beneath layers of smiles and polite conversation. I could hear the muffled voices of my parents above, their laughter drifting down like a taunting echo. As I peered into the darkness, I saw a box, old and dust-covered. It was my mother's secret, a stash of letters, written in hurried, frantic script, filled with despair and hidden truths. "What's this?" I whispered, reaching out toward the box, the curiosity burning through my fear. As my fingers brushed against the surface, the memory twisted, and I felt a wave of emotions crash over me, betrayal, anger, sorrow. "It's time to uncover the truth," the figure urged, its voice barely a whisper. "Only then can you be free." Suddenly, the scene faded, and I was back in my bedroom, gasping for breath. My heart raced, pounding in my chest like a wild drum. The figure stood at the foot of my bed, the shadows swirling around it, yet its eyes glowed with a sense of urgency. Now you must choose, it said, a hint of finality in its tone. Will you continue to run from your past, or will you confront the shadows that seek to claim you? I felt the weight of its words pressing down on me, and for the first time, I realized that I was standing on the precipice of something far greater than fear. It was a choice, a moment that could either plunge me deeper into darkness or illuminate the path toward freedom. The choice loomed before me like a chasm, dark and uninviting. I could feel the figure's gaze piercing through the layers of my fear, waiting for my response. My heart pounded like a war drum, echoing in the silence of the room as I wrestled with the weight of my decision. I can't face those memories, I finally said, my voice trembling. They're too painful. What if I can't handle it? The figure moved closer, its outline shifting in the dim light. You have faced pain before. Ignoring it has only allowed it to grow. It is time to confront it and take back your power. I felt a flicker of hope within me, battling against the suffocating dread. What if confronting my past could free me from the shadows that haunted my every thought? A hesitant determination began to rise, like a flame struggling to ignite in the darkness. Okay, I said, my voice steadier now. I'll face it. Show me. In an instant, the room transformed around me, swirling into a vortex of colors and shapes until it settled into another scene, this time a dimly lit attic. The air was heavy with dust and memories long forgotten. The beams of sunlight streamed through a small window, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air, and as I looked around, I recognized the attic from my childhood home. The figure stood beside me, a silent guardian. Here lies the heart of your fears, it whispered, urging me forward. As I stepped deeper into the attic, I noticed an old trunk in the corner, its leather cracked and faded. The sight of it sent a jolt through my body, a rush of recognition flooding my mind. I remembered this trunk. It had been a treasure trove of secrets and forgotten dreams, filled with remnants of a life that felt both familiar and foreign. With a deep breath, I approached the trunk, my hands trembling as I unlatched it. As the lid creaked open, a musty scent wafted into the air, and I was engulfed by a wave of memories, some sweet, others bitter. Inside, I found old photographs, letters, and trinkets from my childhood, a broken toy, a faded drawing, remnants of moments that once held joy. But then I spotted something that sent a shiver down my spine, an envelope, yellowed with age, addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. My heart raced as I reached for it, the weight of anticipation and dread coiling tightly around my chest. I tore it open, unfolding the brittle paper with shaking hands. The words flowed from the page, revealing a truth I had long buried. Dear, your name. If you are reading this, it means you have grown up and perhaps have begun to see the world differently. I hope you know that our family has its share of secrets, ones that may haunt us if left unacknowledged. You are stronger than you think, but you must confront the past to embrace the future. Know that I love you, always. Mom. Tears blurred my vision as I read the note, a mixture of sorrow and relief flooding through me. This was the acknowledgement I had yearned for, a recognition of the shadows that lurked within my family and, consequently, within me. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted, the air thickening with tension. The figure at my side seemed to ripple, its presence growing more intense. Do you understand now? It asked, its voice low and resonant. Your mother sought to protect you from these truths, but the past cannot remain hidden forever. You must confront it. As I processed the note's implications, I felt a heaviness in the room, a weight that pressed against my chest and filled my lungs. The shadows around me began to swirl, twisting into dark shapes that whispered secrets I had never wanted to hear. Why did she keep this from me? I asked, my voice quavering. What was she afraid of? The answers lie in the darkness, the figure replied. You must seek them out. Only then can you break the cycle of fear. Before I could respond, the attic faded away, replaced by another memory, this time a heated argument between my parents in the very same attic. Their voices echoed in the air, sharp and biting, filling the space with tension. I can't keep lying to her, my mother's voice broke through the fog of memory. She deserves to know the truth. Truth? What truth? That we are broken? That we can't keep this family together? My father shot back, his words laced with anger and despair. The scene was like a movie playing out before my eyes, a painful reminder of the fractures within my family. I felt the anguish of my younger self, caught in the crossfire of adult decisions, the weight of their secrets pressing down on me like a vice. Stop! I shouted, feeling a surge of emotion as I confronted my past. Just stop. I want to understand. As if responding to my plea, the figures of my parents turned toward me, their faces twisted with emotion. You think you know pain? My mother asked, her voice wavering. You think you've faced it all? Suddenly, the shadows coalesced around us, morphing into a dark presence that loomed above, feeding on the turmoil of the scene. I felt its cold grip tighten around me, the air heavy with dread and despair. No! I won't let you take me! I cried out, anger bubbling within me, fueled by the years of avoidance and denial. I'm ready to face you. The darkness recoiled, and the figures of my parents faded into the void, leaving me standing alone in the swirling shadows. The figure at my side remained, a steady presence amid the chaos. Face your fears, and reclaim your power, it urged, its voice a soothing balm against the turmoil. You are stronger than you know. Taking a deep breath, I focused on the darkness, feeling the pulse of fear coursing through me. You don't control me. I shouted, channeling my anger into a wave of defiance. I will not be bound by the past. In that moment, the darkness began to shift and writhe, the shadows receding as my voice resonated with power. I felt a lightness wash over me, lifting the weight of despair that had clung to me for so long. As the last vestiges of the darkness faded, I found myself back in my bedroom, the figure still standing at the foot of my bed, its presence a comforting anchor in the aftermath of my confrontation. Have you found clarity? It asked, its eyes glowing softly in the dim light. I think so, I replied, my heart still racing but filled with a newfound strength. I understand now. It's time to let go. The figure nodded, a hint of approval flickering in its gaze. Good. But your journey is not yet over. There are still shadows that linger. I felt a chill creep back into the room as the figure's words echoed in my mind. What other shadows lay hidden, waiting to be confronted? The air in my room grew thick with anticipation, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for what was to come next. I could feel a current of energy pulsing through the space, a mixture of fear and determination intertwining within me. What else is there? I asked the figure, my voice steady despite the dread that clung to me like a second skin. What other shadows do I need to face? The figure regarded me with an intensity that made my skin prick. There are echoes of guilt and regret that haunt you. Until you confront them, the cycle of fear will persist. As soon as it spoke, I was transported again. This time, I stood in a dimly lit hallway lined with doors, each door a different memory, a different shadow. My heart raced as I recognized the places they led to, each one holding the weight of decisions I had made, words I had left unspoken. The figure moved beside me, its presence both reassuring and ominous. Choose wisely, it whispered, its voice echoing against the walls. Each door leads to a truth you must face. I walked along the hallway, my fingers brushing against the cold surfaces of the doors. Each one felt alive, pulsing with a distinct energy, waiting for me to make a choice. Finally, I stopped in front of a door that felt different from the rest. It was slightly ajar, a faint light spilling into the hallway. With a deep breath, I pushed it open. Inside, I found myself in a small room filled with familiar objects, my old trophies, photographs, and mementos of achievements and dreams. But in the center stood a mirror, its surface warped and clouded, reflecting distorted images of my past self. I stepped closer, a mix of nostalgia and unease churning in my gut. The reflection twisted, showing me moments I had buried deep, my first failures, the times I had let people down, and the relationships I had neglected. "What is this place?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "This is the reflection of your guilt," the figure replied, standing behind me. "It is the weight of the choices you regret." As I gazed into the mirror, my heart ached with memories of friendships lost and opportunities squandered. I remembered the times I had turned away from people who needed me, choosing my fears over their struggles. Each image was a reminder of the burden I had carried, an invisible weight that had grown heavier over time. "No more," I said firmly, feeling anger and sadness mingling within me. "I can't keep carrying this guilt." The figure nodded, urging me to confront it. "Speak your truth. Acknowledge your mistakes." Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch the mirror. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm sorry for not being there for you. I'm sorry for the times I let you down. I didn't mean to hurt you." With each apology, I felt the weight of guilt begin to lift. The images in the mirror shifted, showing me the faces of those I had wronged, their expressions a mixture of disappointment and understanding. "I never wanted to be like this," I continued, tears streaming down my face. "I thought I could protect myself by keeping my distance, but all I did was hurt you. I'm so sorry." As I spoke, the mirror shattered, its pieces scattering like falling stars. I felt a rush of warmth envelop me, the remnants of guilt melting away as I faced my past. The figure watched silently, its eyes glimmering with approval. "You are beginning to understand. Acceptance is the first step toward healing." But before I could fully absorb this realization, the room began to shift again, swirling into a vortex of colors and shadows until I found myself standing outside in the backyard of my childhood home. It was night, the sky illuminated by a silvery moon, casting an ethereal glow over the familiar landscape. "Now you face the final shadow," the figure said, its voice echoing in the stillness. "The fear that paralyzes you." As I looked around, I noticed a familiar tree, a towering oak that had been my sanctuary as a child. But now, it loomed over me like a dark sentinel, its branches twisting and curling against the night sky, casting ominous shadows on the ground. I walked toward it, the weight of fear pressing heavily on my chest. I had avoided this tree for years, fearing the stories of dark spirits that had once surrounded it. But now, I understood that my fear was rooted in my own insecurities and the unknown. "What am I afraid of?" I whispered, staring at the tree. "What is it that keeps me from confronting this fear?" The figure stepped closer, its presence a grounding force. "Fear of the unknown. Fear of facing what lies within. You must confront this fear to break free." Gathering my courage, I reached out and touched the rough bark, feeling its texture beneath my fingers. The tree shivered in response, and for a moment, I was lost in a whirl of emotions, fear, anxiety, and uncertainty flooding my senses. "I am not afraid of you," I shouted, my voice piercing the stillness of the night. "I will not let you control me anymore." As I declared my defiance, the shadows around the tree began to dissipate, revealing a path that had been hidden all along. I could see the light filtering through the leaves, beckoning me forward. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the light, feeling the warmth envelop me. The darkness faded away, and I was filled with a sense of liberation. I had faced my fears, my guilt, and my past, and now I stood at the threshold of a new beginning. The figure smiled, its form beginning to dissolve into the light. "You have taken the first step toward reclaiming your power. Remember, the journey does not end here. It is only just beginning. Will I see you again?" I asked, a hint of uncertainty creeping into my voice. "You will carry the lessons you've learned within you," it replied softly. "Trust in yourself, and you will find your way." As the figure vanished, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. I stood in the moonlight, breathing deeply, ready to embrace whatever came next. The shadows that once haunted me were now mere memories, stepping stones on my path to healing. With a newfound strength, I took a step forward, ready to embrace the future. The light from the moon bathed the backyard in a silvery glow, illuminating the path ahead. Each step I took felt lighter, my heart unburdened by the weight of fear and regret. Yet, even in this newfound sense of clarity, a lingering shadow remained, an unshakable feeling that the ultimate test was still to come. As I walked along the path illuminated by the moonlight, I found myself drawn back to the house. The familiar creak of the door echoed in the stillness as I stepped inside, the air thick with memories. It felt as if the house itself was alive, watching and waiting. "Am I truly ready?" I whispered into the silence, the question echoing back at me. I was confronted with the possibility that perhaps I hadn't yet faced my greatest fear, the fear of losing control over my own life. With each room I entered, fragments of my past emerged like phantoms, urging me to confront them. In the living room, I saw my family gathered around the television, laughing together. In the kitchen, the scent of my mother's cooking lingered, evoking a sense of warmth and belonging. But as I stepped deeper into the house, the air turned cold. I moved toward the basement door, the place I had always avoided. It felt as though someone, was beckoning me to descend into the depths of my own fears. "Face it," I murmured to myself, my pulse quickening. "Face what lies below." I opened the door, and the stairs creaked ominously as I descended into the darkness. The air was thick, charged with an unsettling energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Each step felt like a leap into the unknown, a plunge into the depths of my subconscious. At the bottom, I found myself in a dimly lit room, the walls lined with old photographs and mementos from my past, pieces of my life that I had tried to forget. In the center stood a solitary figure, shrouded in shadows, its features indistinct but undeniably familiar. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice echoing against the damp walls. "What do you want from me?" The figure stepped into the light, revealing itself as a distorted reflection of me, a twisted version that bore the scars of my unaddressed fears and unresolved issues. It grinned, a grotesque smile that sent chills down my spine. "I am what you've tried to ignore," it said, its voice a chilling whisper. "I am your regrets, your fears, and your insecurities. You can't escape me." "No!" I shouted, the intensity of my emotion surging. "I won't let you control me anymore." The figure laughed, a sound filled with malice. "But you've been feeding me all along. Every time you choose fear over courage, every time you let doubt creep in, You strengthen me. You have always had the power to banish me, yet here I stand, a testament to your weaknesses. As it spoke, the room grew darker, the shadows swirling around me, threatening to pull me under. I could feel the pressure building, squeezing the breath from my lungs. This was the moment of truth. I needed to confront this twisted version of myself. Get out! I screamed, the desperation clawing at my throat. You are not me. You are a shadow I refuse to live with. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I focused on the memories I had confronted earlier, the guilt, the fear, the realization that I had the power to change. I began to recite the words of my apologies again, not just to the memories I had faced, but to this darker side of myself. I am sorry for letting you grow, I declared, my voice steadying. I am sorry for giving you power over me. I accept you, but I will not let you define who I am. With each word, the figure shrank, its grotesque form twisting and writhing as the light enveloped it. The room crackled with energy as the shadows began to recede, revealing the light that had been hidden beneath the darkness. I release you, I whispered fiercely, feeling a surge of empowerment coursing through me. I am stronger than my fears. I am not defined by my mistakes. The figure howled, a sound filled with anguish, as it dissolved into a cloud of dark smoke, dissipating into the air like a bad dream fading upon waking. The room brightened, the oppressive weight lifting as the shadows melted away. I stood alone in the light, breathing heavily, feeling an incredible sense of relief and liberation. I had faced my fears and acknowledged the parts of myself I had tried to hide. But as I turned to leave the basement, a flicker of doubt crept in. Had I truly banished the darkness, or would it return when I least expected it? Emerging from the basement, I took a moment to ground myself, standing in the moonlit hallway. The past may always linger at the edges of my consciousness, but now I understood that I had the strength to confront it. I had taken the power back. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I looked up at the stars, feeling an overwhelming sense of hope wash over me. I had faced the darkness, and in doing so, I had found the light within myself. But deep down, I knew that the journey was far from over. Life would always bring challenges, shadows that could resurface. Yet, with every step forward, I would be armed with the knowledge that I could confront whatever came my way. Goodbye, I whispered into the night, a bittersweet farewell to the fear that had once consumed me. I am ready for whatever lies ahead. And in that moment, I realized that perhaps the true essence of freedom lay not in the absence of fear, but in the courage to face it. Cursed wedding. Have you ever felt a chill in the air, a sense that something isn't quite right, but you can't put your finger on it? That's how I felt the day I received the invitation to my cousin's wedding. It was an elegant card, adorned with golden calligraphy and delicate lace, a beautiful reflection of the love they shared. Yet, as I held it in my hands, a shiver crept down my spine. I arrived at the venue, an old mansion nestled in the woods, enveloped by towering trees that whispered secrets to one another. It was the kind of place that looked enchanting during the day but transformed into something sinister as the sun dipped below the horizon. The wedding was set to take place in the grand hall, where light filtered through stained glass windows, casting eerie patterns on the wooden floor. The atmosphere was thick with excitement. Guests mingled, laughter echoing off the walls, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. The mansion had its own history, tales of lost souls and tragic love stories. It was said that a couple had once perished here on their wedding day, their spirits trapped in a never-ending cycle of sorrow. I dismissed the stories as mere superstition until I stepped into the hall. As I sat in my seat, I scanned the crowd, spotting familiar faces. My cousin, Emma, looked radiant, her dress flowing like a waterfall of silk. The groom, Mark, stood beside her, a wide smile plastered on his face. They were perfect together, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that nothing could go wrong. But then the lights flickered, plunging us into darkness for a heartbeat. Gasps filled the air, and when the lights returned, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the hall, making the candles flicker. The murmurs of concern rippled through the guests, yet Emma and Mark continued their vows, oblivious to the sudden shift in energy. As they exchanged rings, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow, too quick to define. I blinked, convincing myself it was a trick of the light. But deep down, a knot of dread twisted in my stomach. What if the stories were true? The ceremony progressed, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The air grew heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. As Emma and Mark sealed their vows with a kiss, a crack of thunder erupted outside, shaking the windows. The laughter that followed felt hollow, echoing against the walls like a haunting melody. After the ceremony, the reception began, and the guests tried to shake off the ominous feeling that lingered. I joined in, forcing a smile, yet the shadows seemed to lengthen, creeping closer with every passing moment. I noticed the bride and groom had vanished. Where did they go? I asked my brother, who shrugged, equally unsettled. A sense of foreboding washed over me as I wandered through the mansion, searching for them. I stumbled upon a small room tucked away at the end of a dark hallway. The door creaked open, revealing a dusty mirror framed in tarnished gold. I stepped inside, entranced by the reflection, but as I gazed into it, I caught a glimpse of figures standing behind me, two indistinct shapes, pale and ethereal. My heart raced as I spun around, but the room was empty. Had I imagined it? I felt lightheaded, a strange compulsion drawing me back to the mirror. It was then that I noticed the inscription at the bottom, barely legible, bound by love, cursed to remain. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath misting in the air. My mind raced. What was happening? I wanted to flee, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. In that moment of paralyzing fear, I sensed a presence, cold and sorrowful. Then I heard it, a whisper, faint yet clear, "Help us." I stumbled backward, heart pounding, the reality of my surroundings shifting. I was no longer in the mansion but standing at the altar where Emma and Mark had exchanged their vows, their smiles frozen in time. I glanced around, panic rising within me, but no one else seemed to notice the shift. The laughter and music faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. I looked back at the mirror, now fogged, revealing outlines of the couple standing behind me, their faces twisted in anguish. The weight of their sorrow pressed down on me, threatening to consume me whole. As the chilling realization struck me, I understood the wedding was a facade, a mere illusion crafted by forces beyond my comprehension. Emma and Mark were trapped, and their love had become a curse. The laughter of the guests returned, but it was no longer a joyous sound. It reverberated like a dirge, echoing through the hall, taunting me with the knowledge of their fate. As the echo of laughter faded, a palpable silence enveloped me. My heart raced as I staggered back, trying to comprehend the figures in the mirror. They were the couple from the stories, the ones who had perished on their wedding day, bound to this place for eternity. "Help us," the whisper returned, more insistent this time, as if the very walls of the mansion were pleading for release. I turned away from the mirror, desperation clawing at my throat. I needed to find Emma and Mark before it was too late. I rushed out of the small room, the chills still clinging to my skin. The corridor stretched endlessly, and the once vibrant colors of the mansion faded to dull shades of gray. Each step felt heavier, as if the mansion itself was trying to anchor me down. Finally, I found my way back to the grand hall. The guests danced and celebrated, blissfully unaware of the dread that loomed just beyond the veil of their laughter. I scanned the room for Emma and Mark, but they were nowhere to be found. Where did they go? I asked my brother again, but he was lost in conversation, his laughter ringing hollow against my ear. Frustration bubbled up inside me as I pushed through the crowd, searching every corner of the mansion. My mind raced back to the old stories, tales of love lost and spirits trapped in the places they had once cherished. I recalled a rumor that those who disturbed the spirits would find themselves ensnared in the same fate. But how could I help them if I couldn't even find them? I entered the kitchen, the smell of rich food hanging in the air, but the room was devoid of life. The pots and pans lay abandoned, steam curling upward as if waiting for the chefs who would never return. I glanced out the back window and froze. In the moonlight, I spotted figures in the garden, shrouded in mist. They glided, ethereal and sorrowful, their forms flickering like candle flames. I couldn't tell if they were human or something else entirely. Curiosity wrestled with fear as I crept outside, drawn to the haunting scene. As I stepped into the garden, the atmosphere shifted. The vibrant blooms that had earlier burst with life were now wilted and twisted, as if the beauty of the wedding had corrupted the very essence of the place. The figures continued to sway, whispering to one another, their words mingling with the rustle of the leaves. "Emma!" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. One of the figures turned, and I recognized her, a fleeting glimpse of my cousin's wedding dress, now torn and stained. It was Emma, but her face was pale, her eyes hollow. "You must leave," she cried, her voice a mere wisp of wind. "You can't help us." Panic surged through me. "But I can't leave you like this," I shouted, desperation lacing my tone. "What happened to you?" Her expression twisted in sorrow. "The curse binds us here. Our love was too strong, and now we cannot move on. The mansion feeds on our pain. What can I do?" I pleaded. "How can I help you?" "Break the cycle," she whispered, her form flickering. "Find the truth of that day, the day we died. Only then can we be free." Before I could respond, she vanished, leaving me alone in the garden, the whispers fading into the night. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, the weight of her words sinking in. I had to uncover what had happened to them, the truth behind the tragedy that had ensnared them in this spectral limbo. But as I turned to head back inside, I noticed a shadow lurking in the doorway of the mansion, a dark figure watching me. It stood still, its outline sharp against the pale light spilling from the windows. My breath hitched as I recognized the shape, a man in a suit, his expression eerily calm, yet his eyes glimmered with something sinister. "Who are you?" I stammered, fear creeping into my voice. He stepped forward, the shadows clinging to him like a shroud. "You shouldn't be here," he warned, his voice smooth like velvet but laced with malice. "This place is not what it seems." "Is it you?" I blurted out, the stories I had heard flooding my mind. "Are you the one who caused their deaths?" A flicker of amusement danced across his lips. "Death?" he echoed, stepping closer, his presence suffocating. "I merely facilitated their fate. They were always meant to be mine." I felt the world around me shift, the air heavy with dread. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling as I took a step back. "To keep them close," he replied, an unsettling smile creeping across his face. They are bound to this place, and now you are too. Their love fuels my power, and your presence only strengthens it. My heart raced as I turned to run, the garden fading behind me. I needed to escape this madness, to find Emma and Mark and fulfill their plea. But as I burst back into the grand hall, the laughter of the guests echoed around me, a twisted symphony of joy and despair. In that moment, I knew I was running out of time. I stumbled back into the grand hall, the laughter and music swirling around me like a suffocating fog. It felt surreal, as if I were trapped in a nightmare where joy danced mockingly alongside despair. I needed to find Emma and Mark before it was too late. The figure in the doorway lingered in my mind, a sinister reminder that I was not alone in this cursed place. I forced myself to navigate through the throng of oblivious guests, my heart pounding as I searched for any sign of the couple. Every corner I turned seemed to warp and twist, the mansion itself shifting like a living entity, refusing to reveal its secrets. I felt an urgent need to get to the bottom of what had happened here, to break the cycle that held Emma and Mark captive. In a moment of desperation, I decided to seek out the mansion's library. It was a dimly lit room filled with dusty tomes and forgotten tales, an archive of history waiting to be uncovered. Perhaps there, I could find clues about the couple's tragic fate. As I entered, the scent of aged paper hit me like a wave, mingled with the scent of something musty and old. The walls were lined with towering shelves, each book a potential window into the past. I began to sift through the volumes, running my fingers along the spines until one particular book caught my attention. It was an ornate leather-bound volume, its title embossed in gold, The Secrets of Eldridge Manor. I pulled it from the shelf and opened it, the pages crumbling beneath my touch. The words spoke of love, loss, and the very essence of the mansion, a place where the living and the dead intertwined. The tales were filled with warnings, stories of couples who had perished under tragic circumstances, their souls eternally bound to the land. As I read, a passage caught my eye. When love is forged in the fires of desire and ambition, it may bloom beautifully, yet its roots can entangle the souls involved, leaving them trapped in a web of despair. My pulse quickened. Was this what had happened to Emma and Mark? Just then, the lights flickered again, plunging the library into darkness for a heartbeat before flickering back to life. I glanced around, feeling a familiar chill creeping up my spine. Hadn't I just seen shadows moving in the corners of my vision? Panic surged through me, but I pressed on, knowing that I had to find the truth. Turning another page, I found a sketch of the mansion's layout, including hidden passages and secret rooms. One area caught my eye, a room that hadn't been mentioned before, located in the basement. A cold knot of fear twisted in my stomach. I had to see it. With the book clutched tightly to my chest, I made my way through the winding halls, heading toward the basement door. The air grew colder with every step, as if the very essence of the house was trying to dissuade me. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering above the knob, but the thought of Emma and Mark's trapped souls urged me forward. The basement was darker than the rest of the mansion, the air thick with an earthy scent and the sound of water dripping in the distance. I switched on my phone's flashlight, illuminating the damp stone walls that seemed to close in around me. Each step echoed ominously as I descended deeper into the shadows. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a long corridor lined with heavy wooden doors. My heart raced as I approached the first door, a sense of dread hanging in the air. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling. What lay beyond could very well be the key to Emma and Mark's freedom or my own doom. I opened the door, revealing a small, dimly lit room. It was filled with remnants of the past, tattered wedding decorations, wilted flowers, and an old, ornate mirror that stood in the corner. My breath caught in my throat as I approached it. Was this the same mirror I had seen earlier? As I stood before it, the glass rippled, and the figures of Emma and Mark appeared once more, their faces twisted in anguish. "Help us," they whispered in unison, their voices echoing in my mind. "What do you need from me?" I implored, desperation spilling from my lips. "How can I break this curse?" The mirror shimmered, showing glimpses of the day they died, a vibrant wedding turned to horror. I saw Emma in her gown, radiant and smiling, while Mark stood beside her, looking dashing. But then came the shadows, dark figures lurking just out of sight. The vision blurred, replaced by chaos, screams and terror, the flicker of candles casting long shadows on the walls. I stumbled backward, the weight of the truth crashing down on me. The shadows had taken them, their love had drawn the darkness to this place. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. If I didn't confront the darkness, if I didn't uncover what had truly happened that day, they would remain trapped forever. Suddenly, the mirror darkened, the shadows swirling around the edges, and I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. Panic surged within me as I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the suffocating darkness. "Stay with us," a voice hissed, sharp and clear, sending shivers down my spine. I felt the shadows encroach, the air thickening with despair. "No!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the cramped space. "I won't let you take me." I pounded on the door, the sound resonating through the darkness, but it wouldn't budge. I was not only fighting for Emma and Mark, but for my own life. I needed to escape, to find a way to confront the darkness that sought to claim us all. In that moment of desperation, I remembered the book, the stories of love and loss, the whispers of truth. There had to be a way to confront the shadows, to break the curse binding Emma and Mark. With renewed determination, I turned back to the mirror, my reflection staring back at me, twisted and afraid. "Tell me how to help you," I cried, desperation lacing my tone. And as if answering my plea, the glass shimmered once more, revealing a new scene, one of hope, a flicker of light amidst the darkness. The mirror flickered, a tapestry of light and shadow dancing across its surface. I leaned closer, heart pounding as the scene unfolded before me. I saw Emma and Mark standing hand in hand, surrounded by guests, laughter filling the air. But lurking just beyond the joyous scene, I glimpsed the dark figures, the same shadows that had haunted their wedding day, watching with hollow eyes. "Find the light," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with urgency. "You must find the truth." "What truth?" I demanded, desperation clawing at my insides. "Tell me what to do." The mirror rippled again, and I saw a flash, a flicker of a candlelit room, a door slightly ajar, and the unmistakable glimmer of a knife. My heart sank as the image faded, leaving me with an unsettling sense of dread. I knew that knife was significant. It was the catalyst for their tragic end. Suddenly, the door behind me rattled violently, breaking my focus. I turned, my pulse racing as I heard the whisper of shadows creeping closer. "Stay with us," they hissed, their voices intertwining into a cacophony of anguish. I felt their coldness seeping into my bones, the air thickening with despair. "No!" I shouted, determination surging within me. I refused to be part of this nightmare. Summoning every ounce of courage, I slammed my palm against the mirror's surface. "Tell me how to break the curse," I cried, the desperation in my voice echoing in the dark room. For a moment, the mirror darkened, the whispers fading to a tense silence. Then, it burst to life, illuminating the room with a blinding light. Emma's face appeared, clear and desperate. "You must confront the source of the darkness," she urged. The knife, it was the last gift of betrayal. Find it and return it to us. The shadows pressed closer, their presence suffocating. You don't belong here, they snarled, their voices rising to a chilling crescendo. You cannot save them. But I had to try. I turned from the mirror, determination anchoring my feet as I pushed against the door. It creaked open, and I stumbled back into the corridor, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. The mansion felt alive, its walls shifting, whispering secrets I couldn't yet understand. I hurried down the hall, my heart racing, the echoes of laughter and despair intertwining in a haunting symphony. I needed to find that knife, the weapon that had severed their love and tethered their souls to this cursed place. The path led me back toward the grand hall, where the party was still in full swing. The guests danced, oblivious to the darkness swirling around them. I weaved through the crowd, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of the knife, the thing that had anchored the shadows to this realm. Then I saw it, a glint of metal on a table at the far end of the hall. I rushed toward it, pushing past laughing guests and the intoxicating rhythm of the music. The moment I reached the table, my heart sank. There it was, a gleaming silver knife, its blade reflecting the flickering candlelight. It felt wrong, a harbinger of doom sitting so casually amidst the festivities. I hesitated, the darkness tightening its grip on me as I grasped the handle. As my fingers wrapped around the cool metal, the shadows surged, screaming in fury. You cannot take it. It belongs to us, they shrieked, a whirlwind of cold and despair swirling around me. But I held firm. I will return it to Emma and Mark. I shouted defiantly, the weight of their plight fueling my resolve. I felt their presence alongside me, their love pushing back against the darkness. As I turned, the shadows lunged, their icy tendrils reaching for me, but I was fueled by the strength of the love that had once bloomed here. I could almost hear Emma's voice urging me on, guiding me as I dashed toward the basement. The air grew heavier as I descended the stairs again, the whispers growing louder, threatening to drown out my thoughts. I reached the small, dimly lit room where the mirror waited. Emma! Mark! I shouted, desperation coursing through me. I have it. I have the knife. As I approached the mirror, their figures materialized, their expressions a mixture of hope and sorrow. You must destroy it, Mark urged, his voice echoing like a haunting melody. Only then can we be free. I glanced at the knife in my hand, the chill of its metal biting into my skin. But how? It's so beautiful, so deadly. Break the cycle, Emma pleaded, her form shimmering. We were betrayed by the love that was supposed to save us. We trusted too easily. With a deep breath, I stepped closer to the mirror, the shadows thrumming around me, their whispers rising to a deafening roar. You cannot do this, they cried, their voices clawing at my sanity. I can, I shouted back, resolve flooding my veins. I will. In one swift motion, I plunged the knife into the mirror's surface, the glass shattering like 1,000 crystals in an explosion of light. The shadows screamed, their forms twisting and writhing as the shards of glass rained down like glimmering stars. As the mirror shattered, a bright light enveloped the room, blinding and pure. I felt Emma and Mark's presence surrounding me, their love intertwining with the light, pushing back against the darkness. The shadows shrieked, their voices fading into nothingness as the light consumed them. I felt the warmth of their love wrap around me, pulling me away from the suffocating darkness. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light dimmed, leaving me standing in the small room, the remnants of the shattered mirror scattered at my feet. The weight of despair had lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Thank you, a whisper echoed in the air, the voices of Emma and Mark lingering as a gentle caress. We are free. I stood alone in the dim room, the remnants of the shattered mirror twinkling around me like fallen stars. The shadows had dissipated, their chilling whispers replaced by an enveloping silence. I felt a heavy weight lifting from my chest, a sense of liberation filling the void left by the darkness. But amid the relief, an unsettling thought crept in. What had really happened to Emma and Mark? Had I truly freed them, or had I merely disturbed something deeper? As I took a step forward, the air shifted, a light breeze brushing past me. I glanced toward the broken shards scattered across the floor. Each piece reflected not just my image, but hints of what had transpired, a fleeting glimpse of their laughter, the sparkle of wedding rings, and a shadow that loomed ever larger, creeping into their lives and mine. Is it over? I whispered into the silence, half hoping for an answer, half fearing one. But no voice answered me. Instead, I felt a tug at my heart, a longing to uncover the truth behind their tragic end. I needed to know what had ensnared them in this cycle of despair, what had transformed a day of joy into one of horror. I couldn't leave without understanding. I made my way back up the stairs, the mansion now eerily quiet. Each step echoed like a heartbeat, the walls seeming to lean in, eager to share their secrets. The grand hall, once vibrant and filled with laughter, now felt like a mausoleum, its decoration serving as a somber reminder of the couple's shattered dreams. As I approached the old library, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I hesitated, my heart racing. Had the shadows returned? But when I entered, I found only a flutter of pages in the dim light, the wind whispering through the half-open window. I stepped closer, drawn to an ancient book lying open on a nearby table, its pages yellowed and fragile. The title read, The Cursed Wedding, A History of Love and Loss. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the names etched on the first page, Emma and Mark. A chill ran down my spine as I scanned the text. It detailed the story of their wedding day, their love, the excitement, the promises made under the bright sun. But it also spoke of a dark omen that had loomed over them, a warning they had dismissed. A story of betrayal and vengeance intertwined with their happiness. As I turned the pages, I found a passage that sent shivers through me. The knife used to sever the bonds of love carries with it the weight of betrayal. It is said that those who wield it, blinded by jealousy or rage, become the very instruments of their own undoing. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. The knife I had shattered wasn't just a tool of death, it had been the focal point of their anguish, a cursed artifact that had led to their demise. It wasn't merely an object of betrayal, it was a symbol of the darkness that had festered around them, consuming their love and twisting it into something grotesque. Suddenly, the air shifted again, a presence wrapping around me like an icy fog. I spun around, heart pounding as I faced the shadows creeping back into the room. They materialized from the corners, dark figures swirling with rage and despair. You should not have done that, they roared, their voices echoing in a terrifying chorus. You've unleashed the truth, and now you must pay the price. I stumbled back, terror gripping my heart as I realized they were no longer the lost souls seeking liberation. They were the embodiment of betrayal, the vengeful spirits of those wronged, and they were coming for me. Emma! Mark! I shouted, desperate for their guidance. Help me! But their voices were drowned out by the chaos around me. The shadows lunged forward, clawing at my sanity, their whispers growing louder, more frenzied. You cannot escape. You have awakened the curse. Panic surged through me, and I felt the walls closing in, the darkness wrapping around me like a shroud. I had thought I'd freed them, but perhaps I had only stirred the remnants of their pain, drawing the full force of their anguish toward me. I needed to fight back, to reclaim my own light. I grabbed the book from the table, clutching it tightly as I faced the advancing shadows. "I will not be your victim," I screamed, my voice rising above the din. With every ounce of courage, I flipped through the pages, searching for something, anything, that could help me understand the curse, a way to break free from their wrath. "Listen to me," I cried out, hoping to reach the remnants of Emma and Mark within the darkness. "You're not bound to this curse. You deserve peace." As I shouted, the pages began to glow, each word pulsing with a light that illuminated the shadows. The spirits faltered, their forms wavering as the warmth enveloped them. "What is this?" one of the shadows hissed, uncertainty creeping into its voice. "It's your truth," I said, my heart racing as I felt their pain reflected in the light. "Your love deserves to be remembered, not as a tragedy, but as a celebration." As the shadows writhed, the light intensified, filling the room with warmth and clarity. I could see flashes of their memories, happy moments shared, laughter ringing through the air, promises of forever that had been ripped apart by the darkness. I felt their love radiating back, pushing against the despair. In that moment, I understood the curse was not just about the knife or the betrayal. It was about the love that had once existed, the memories that had been twisted into something grotesque. And as I embraced that love, I could feel it washing over me, healing the wounds of the past. "Emma, Mark," I called, my voice steady and clear. "Let go of the pain. Embrace the love that once was." The shadows recoiled, their forms flickering as the light grew stronger. I felt their anguish begin to dissipate, replaced by a profound sense of relief. Slowly, the darkness receded, retreating into the corners of the room as Emma and Mark's presence filled the space with warmth. In one final burst of light, the shadows faded, leaving only a soft glow in their wake. I stood in the now quiet room, breathless and trembling. The book lay closed on the table, its power lingering in the air like a gentle caress. "Thank you," I heard a soft whisper, like a warm breeze passing through me. "We are free." Tears filled my eyes as I realized the truth. Love, no matter how deeply it had been wounded, could triumph over darkness. Emma and Mark's spirits had found peace, and with it, so had I. As I stepped out of the library and back into the grand hall, I felt a sense of closure settling over the mansion. The air was lighter, filled with the promise of renewal. I could almost hear laughter echoing in the distance, a celebration of love that had once flourished here. And as I walked out of the mansion and into the world beyond, I knew I would carry their story with me, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, love would always find a way to shine through. The Secret of the Cave Demon. Have you ever felt a chill creep up your spine, as if unseen eyes were watching your every move? I certainly did, standing at the entrance of the old cave that my friends and I had heard about during our summer break. It was rumored to be a mere legend, a haunting ground for those who dared to explore its depths. Yet, there we were, four eager spelunkers, ready to uncover its secrets. As we gathered our gear in the fading light of a late afternoon, the atmosphere buzzed with an odd mix of excitement and apprehension. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain, making the cave's entrance look like a gaping maw ready to swallow us whole. "What's the worst that could happen?" I joked, trying to mask my own trepidation. My friends, Mark, Sarah, and Jake, laughed it off, but I could see a flicker of doubt in their eyes. Equipped with headlamps and ropes, we ventured into the cave. The air inside was damp and cool, carrying a scent of earth that was both familiar and unsettling. As we descended deeper, the sounds of the outside world faded into an echoing silence, replaced by the distant trickle of water and the soft crunch of gravel under our boots. Each step felt heavier, as if the weight of the cave itself pressed down on us. "Is it just me, or does it feel different in here?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely breaking the stillness. "It's just a cave," Mark replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "It's natural to feel a little on edge." But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. The shadows seemed to shift around us, curling in the flickering light of our headlamps as if they were alive, whispering secrets of the darkness. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination running wild, a trick played by the dim light and our growing anxiety. As we reached a wide chamber, the walls glistened with moisture, reflecting our headlamps like 1,000 tiny stars. I marveled at the beauty around us, but there was something off. A cold breeze swept through the chamber, sending a shiver down my spine. "Did you guys feel that?" I asked, my voice quaking slightly. "Feel what?" Jake replied, scanning the cave with his beam. "It's just a draft." "Maybe we should take a break," Sarah suggested, her breath visible in the cool air. "We can check the map and plan our next move." As we settled down, I couldn't shake the sensation that we were being watched. I peered into the shadows, half expecting to see a figure lurking just out of sight. My mind raced with thoughts of what could be hiding in the darkness, and I quickly dismissed each one, reminding myself it was just a cave, just rock and earth. But then I heard it, a faint whisper, barely discernible, like the rustling of leaves in a still forest. My heart raced as I strained to listen. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Mark asked, looking at me with a puzzled expression. "That whisper," I insisted. "I swear I heard something." "Come on, you're just spooking yourself," Jake chuckled, but I could see the flicker of concern in his eyes. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. We were here for an adventure, not to succumb to shadows and whispers. After a few minutes of resting and gathering our courage, we decided to move deeper into the cave, motivated by curiosity and a desire to prove my nerves were unfounded. As we navigated through a narrow passage, the air became thicker, almost suffocating. I felt the walls closing in, and an unease settled in my gut. Just as I was about to voice my discomfort, we stumbled into another chamber, larger than the last, with high ceilings that seemed to vanish into the darkness above. "Wow," Sarah breathed, momentarily replacing her earlier fears. "Look at those formations." Stalactites hung like teeth from the ceiling, and bizarre rock formations jutted from the ground. But it was not the beauty that held my gaze, it was the far wall. There, shrouded in shadow, was a peculiar shape, an outline that seemed too deliberate to be a natural formation. My heart raced again, this time not from fear but a creeping dread that something was terribly wrong. "What do you think that is?" I asked, pointing toward the darkness. Mark stepped closer, his headlamp illuminating the wall. "It's just a rock formation, nothing to worry about," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. But I wasn't so sure. The closer we got, the more I felt a pull, an unnatural allure that beckoned me toward the shadows. "Let's check it out," I suggested, though my heart thumped wildly in my chest. As we approached, the whispering returned, louder this time, curling around us like smoke. I could almost make out words, though they were indistinct and haunting. My skin prickled with anxiety, and I could feel Sarah's unease beside me. "Guys, I don't think this is a good idea," she murmured, glancing back toward the way we had come. But before we could retreat, the shadows shifted, revealing a grotesque face in the stone, a monstrous visage that seemed to leer at us from the darkness. Frozen in place, I could feel my heart racing. The whispers intensified, growing louder, a cacophony of voices that filled the chamber with an overwhelming presence. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like lead. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the face faded back into the rock, leaving only the echoes of its whispers behind. A heavy silence fell over us, thick and suffocating. The cave felt alive, and it was aware of our presence. "Did you see that?" I gasped, turning to my friends, but their expressions were a mix of shock and disbelief. "We need to leave," Sarah said, her voice trembling. But as we turned to retrace our steps, a low rumble reverberated through the cave, shaking the ground beneath us. The exit seemed to shrink, and the darkness pressed in closer, suffocating us. I glanced back at the wall, half expecting the face to reappear, but it was only the shadow of our fears that loomed larger with each passing moment. I felt a pull deeper into the cave, an inexplicable urge to uncover whatever secrets lay hidden in its depths. But now, it felt like we were being drawn into something far beyond our comprehension, a force that thrived on our fear. We exchanged glances, each of us silently questioning our decision to venture here. But it was too late to turn back now. Curiosity had already claimed us. As we hesitated, the rumble subsided, replaced by a thick, oppressive silence that weighed heavily on our shoulders. The only sounds were our uneven breaths and the distant drip of water, echoing like a countdown to something inevitable. I felt an urge to turn back, but the pull toward the darkness deepened, a sinister invitation I couldn't ignore. "Let's keep going," Mark finally said, trying to sound brave, though I could hear the tremor in his voice. "We didn't come all this way to turn back now." With that, he led the way deeper into the cave, his headlamp slicing through the darkness. Reluctantly, we followed, our footsteps echoing ominously around us. Each step further into the abyss felt like a step away from safety, but curiosity and a sense of adventure overpowered my instincts. The passage narrowed, and the walls seemed to close in on us, slick with moisture. Shadows danced erratically in the beam of our lights, creating the illusion of movement in the corners of my vision. I struggled to suppress the rising dread that clawed at my throat. "What if we get lost?" Jake asked, glancing back at the path behind us. "We should mark our way." "Good idea," I replied, taking out a piece of chalk from my bag. I drew an arrow on the wall, signaling our route back. It was a simple gesture, but it brought little comfort as I felt the cave's weight pressing down, enveloping us in its cold embrace. As we moved deeper, we entered another chamber, this one larger and more foreboding than the last. The ceiling arched high above us, lost in darkness, and a sense of foreboding settled over the space. Stalactites hung like ominous icicles, and the floor was littered with loose rocks, creating a treacherous path. "Let's take a moment to catch our breath," Sarah suggested, her voice shaky. We huddled together, our headlamps casting a warm glow against the cold stone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows seemed to pulse, breathing with a life of their own. I glanced around, trying to convince myself it was just the natural formations playing tricks on my mind. Suddenly, the whispering returned, more pronounced this time. It wrapped around us like a chilling fog, and I could almost hear distinct words woven into the sound, a warning, perhaps, from a world beyond our own. My heart raced, and I looked at my friends, hoping they heard it too. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Hear what?" Mark replied, frowning. "The whispers," I exclaimed, panic creeping into my tone. They're right here. Jake rolled his eyes. You're imagining things. This cave is playing tricks on your mind. Let's just keep moving. Against my better judgment, I nodded, but I felt the unease growing like a thick fog around us. The further we ventured, the more alive the cave felt, pulsing with energy that seemed to respond to our fear. We made our way through another narrow passage, and as we did, I noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols I couldn't recognize. They appeared ancient, etched deep into the stone as if warning us to stay away. A sense of dread washed over me, but I pushed it aside, trying to maintain a semblance of courage. When we finally emerged into a vast cavern, the enormity of it took my breath away. A subterranean river snaked through the chamber, its water glistening in the beam of our lights. The walls were adorned with glimmering crystals, sparkling like stars against the backdrop of darkness. It was beautiful, but something about it felt wrong, like a trap laid by the cave itself. "Look at that," Sarah said, pointing toward a series of large boulders jutting out of the water. "We should explore over there." Reluctantly, I followed her lead, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. As we navigated the slick rocks, I couldn't shake the feeling that the water held something beneath its surface, something dark and waiting. A sense of dread settled in my gut as the whispers intensified, rising like a crescendo, growing louder, more insistent. Then, without warning, Jake slipped on a wet stone, sending a cascade of water splashing up. "Watch out," he shouted, but it was too late. He lost his balance and fell into the river. "Jake!" I screamed, panic surging through me. He flailed in the water, struggling to find his footing. I rushed toward him, the cave echoing with our frantic movements. "Grab my hand," I shouted, extending my arm. But as I reached for him, I felt something brush against my leg, something cold and slimy. I recoiled, terror gripping me as I looked down into the dark water. My heart pounded in my chest, and in that moment, I knew something was wrong. This was no ordinary river. "Help!" Jake cried, desperation lacing his voice as the current pulled him further away. I lunged forward, grabbing his wrist, and pulled with all my strength. Sarah joined me, and together, we managed to haul him back to the rocky shore, gasping and sputtering. "What the hell was that?" Jake panted, looking back at the water, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. As we scrambled back to the cave's edge, the whispers morphed into a chilling laughter, echoing through the cavern as if the cave itself was mocking our fear. My heart raced as I scanned the shadows, feeling that we were not alone. "It's just a cave," Mark insisted, though his voice was unsteady. "It's just a natural phenomenon." But I wasn't convinced. I felt a cold breath against my neck, and every hair on my body stood on end. "Let's move," Sarah urged, her voice breaking as she stepped back from the water. We hastily made our way back toward the passage we had entered, but as we retraced our steps, the cave seemed to shift around us. The paths we had marked no longer looked familiar, the shadows morphing into grotesque shapes that loomed over us, whispering secrets I dared not decipher. "Stay close," I commanded, fear lacing my tone. With every twist and turn, I felt an oppressive weight bearing down, threatening to engulf us in darkness. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, each voice a dissonant echo of fear. The cave felt alive, and the shadows closed in, eager to swallow us whole. As we stumbled deeper into the cavern's embrace, the shadows thickened, wrapping around us like a shroud. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in time with the whispers that slithered through the air, weaving a tapestry of dread. I turned to my friends, their faces pale and drawn, reflecting my own growing terror. "Where are we?" Mark breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, panic bubbling beneath the surface. "But we have to keep moving. This place it's not right." As we forged ahead, the air grew colder, and I could see our breaths forming misty clouds. The cavern twisted and turned, each bend revealing new horrors. Jagged rocks protruded like teeth, and the silence between the whispers was almost deafening. It felt like the cave was listening, waiting for our next move, and the sense of being watched became an unbearable weight on my shoulders. We reached another chamber, this one even darker than the last, where the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. My headlamp flickered, and I fought to keep the beam steady. "Let's take a moment," Sarah suggested, her voice shaky. "We need to regroup and figure out our way back." I nodded, though the prospect of stopping sent chills down my spine. We gathered around a rock formation that offered a small reprieve from the encroaching darkness. As we caught our breath, the whispers began to form words, soft and insidious, echoing in my mind. "Leave, now." "What did you say?" Jake asked, looking at me with wide eyes. "I didn't say anything," I replied, swallowing hard. The whispers grew louder, the urgency in their tone rising, echoing around us, bouncing off the walls like a macabre symphony. "Leave, now, before it's too late." Panic surged within me, and I glanced at my friends, desperate to gauge their reactions. Mark looked pale, his eyes darting around, and I could see the fear etched on his face. "We need to get out of here. This place it's alive," I said, urgency creeping into my voice. "Just a little longer," Mark insisted. "I want to see where this leads." Before I could protest, he moved deeper into the chamber, drawn by some invisible force. "Mark, wait!" I shouted, but he pressed on, seemingly entranced. "Don't be an idiot!" Sarah yelled after him, but he didn't respond. Against my better judgment, I followed him, heart racing. As I stepped further into the darkness, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread clawing at my insides, whispering that we were making a terrible mistake. The chamber opened up, revealing a larger cavern illuminated by an eerie, bioluminescent glow emanating from the walls. Strange fungi clung to the rock, their luminescence casting ghostly shadows across the floor. I could hardly believe the beauty of it, but my gut twisted with the awareness that something was deeply wrong. "Mark, this is incredible," I said, trying to mask my fear with awe. But my admiration faded as I noticed something lurking in the shadows, shifting just beyond the reach of the light. It was a figure, indistinct yet undeniably present. My pulse quickened, and the air around me thickened with a sense of impending doom. "Mark, look!" I pointed toward the shadow, but he shrugged me off, too enthralled by the glowing walls. "It's just a trick of the light," he said dismissively. "We're fine." As if on cue, the shadow shifted again, and a low growl reverberated through the chamber, sending a wave of icy fear down my spine. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, eyes wide. Mark chuckled nervously, but Sarah's face was grim. "I think we should turn back now." Before we could make our way back, the growl intensified, reverberating through the chamber like thunder. The air crackled with energy, and the whispers transformed into a cacophony of voices, each one more urgent than the last. "Run!" Suddenly, the shadow lunged forward, and I saw it, a grotesque figure, its form twisted and unnatural, eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Fear gripped me like a vice as I turned to flee, adrenaline propelling me forward. "Run!" I shouted, adrenaline surging as I sprinted toward the exit. Go! Sarah cried, her voice filled with terror. I could hear her footsteps pounding behind me, but I didn't dare look back. The growl echoed louder, reverberating through the cavern as if the very walls were closing in on us. We raced through the chamber, narrowly avoiding the outstretched claws of the creature. I felt the darkness closing in, like a predator ready to pounce. My heart thundered in my chest, and I could hear my friend's frantic breaths behind me, urging me on. Finally, we reached the narrow passage, and I squeezed through the tight space, barely escaping the creature's grasp. It was dark, but I could still hear the whispers, a chilling reminder of our folly. Keep going, Mark shouted as we emerged into another chamber, but my legs felt heavy with dread. The growling had faded into the distance, but the whispers remained, taunting us with their insidious chant. You should have left. You should have left. As we caught our breath, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. This wasn't over. We were still trapped in the cave, and the presence that haunted us had only retreated, waiting for its moment to strike. Let's find a way out, I urged, my voice shaking. We can't stay here. But as we began to move, the ground trembled beneath our feet, and a series of low rumblings echoed through the cavern, followed by a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cave. The walls vibrated, and I could see cracks spreading like veins through the rock. Run! I screamed, and we took off again, hearts racing, as the cave began to collapse around us. We raced through the crumbling cavern, our breaths quickening with every step as the echoes of our footsteps mingled with the roar of the collapsing cave. The darkness closed in around us, and with each tremor, I felt as if the very earth was alive, angry at our intrusion. Where do we go? Jake shouted, panic lacing his voice. I don't know. Just keep moving. I yelled back, my heart pounding against my ribcage like a caged animal desperate to escape. We navigated through narrow passages and large chambers, trying to remember the route we had taken, but the cave had transformed into a labyrinth. Shadows danced in the flickering light of our headlamps, and every creak of stone felt like a sinister whisper urging us to turn back. Suddenly, Mark stumbled, his foot catching on a jagged rock. He fell hard, and I could hear the crack of bone as he hit the ground. Mark! Sarah cried, rushing to his side. I could see his face contorted in pain, and the shadows around us seemed to close in tighter, the whispers growing louder. Go! You have to go, he gasped, clutching his leg. No! We can't leave you. I protested, my stomach twisting with fear. I'll hold them off. Just run, he shouted, his voice echoing in the hollow darkness. Tears stung my eyes as I shook my head, but I knew we had no time. The cave was falling apart around us, and if we didn't act quickly, we would all be trapped. Come on, I urged, pulling Sarah away from Mark. She hesitated, her face a mask of anguish, but I could see the determination hardening in her eyes. With a final, desperate glance at Mark, we turned and sprinted down the passage. I could hear the growl again, reverberating through the stone walls, and my heart raced as I pushed forward, the urgency of our escape consuming me. Why did we come here? Sarah gasped, her breath coming in short bursts. I thought it would be an adventure, I replied, guilt flooding my veins. I didn't know. Before I could finish, the ground shook violently, and we stumbled, barely keeping our footing as dust and debris fell from above. The whispers crescendoed into a frantic chorus, and I felt a deep, unsettling fear clawing at my mind. Keep moving, I shouted, but my voice was drowned out by the rumbling chaos around us. We stumbled into a larger chamber where the walls glistened with moisture. The glowing foam that cast eerie shadows, and I caught a glimpse of something moving in the periphery of my vision, a flash of darkness that vanished before I could fully see it. What was that? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, I replied, fear gnawing in my stomach. The whispers surged again, more insistent this time, wrapping around us like a shroud. Stay, forever, they hissed, each word sending a chill down my spine. We can't stay here, I urged, taking Sarah's hand. We have to find a way out. As we pressed deeper into the cavern, the walls seemed to close in, squeezing the air from my lungs. The growl echoed once more, this time closer, more powerful, as if it was tracking our every move. Suddenly, we found ourselves in a narrow tunnel, the light from our headlamps barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. The whispers grew louder, now a chaotic cacophony. Turn back, leave, join us. Don't listen to them, I shouted, pushing forward, determined not to let the madness envelop us. But as we stumbled into another chamber, we stopped in horror. There, etched into the walls, were symbols, ancient, sinister markings that pulsed with a life of their own. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, as if the very air was tainted with dread. What is this? Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know, I replied, my voice barely a whisper. But we need to keep moving. We turned to leave, but a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, and I felt a cold breeze sweep through the chamber. It wrapped around me like a lover's embrace, chilling me to the bone. Run! I yelled, instinct kicking in as I pulled Sarah back toward the tunnel. We raced through the dark passage, our footsteps echoing in the silence, but I could hear the growl again, closer this time. I could feel it gaining on us, a predator stalking its prey. Go, go, go! I urged, my heart racing as I pushed forward. We reached a fork in the tunnel, and I had to make a choice. One path led further into the darkness, while the other seemed to curve back toward the entrance. I glanced back, and for a moment, I could see it, an outline in the darkness, its eyes glowing like embers in the night. This way, I shouted, choosing the path that veered toward the entrance. We stumbled through the narrow tunnel, gasping for breath, and the whispers became a frantic chorus, pleading and threatening in equal measure. Stay, join us, don't leave. No, I won't listen. I screamed, my voice a defiant cry against the encroaching darkness. But as we neared the entrance, the ground shook violently again, and I could hear the sounds of rock collapsing behind us. Keep going, Sarah shouted, her voice filled with determination. As we burst into the last chamber, the exit loomed before us, but the figure emerged from the shadows, its grotesque form blocking our escape. I froze, heart pounding as I stared into its glowing eyes, filled with an ancient malice that sent chills down my spine. Leave, it growled, its voice a low rumble that vibrated through my bones. I felt the darkness swirling around me, and in that moment, all hope seemed lost. We were trapped, ensnared in its web of terror, and I knew we were running out of time. The creature loomed before us, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. Its glowing eyes bored into mine, an abyss of ancient hatred and despair. You should not have come here, it hissed, the sound like gravel scraping against stone. My heart raced as panic surged through me. We just want to leave, I shouted, my voice echoing in the chamber, but deep down, I knew that reason would not work on a being like this. Leave, it mocked, a sinister grin stretching across its grotesque face. You cannot leave. You have awakened me. Now, you will join the others. I felt a sickening chill wash over me, memories flooding back of the stories we had laughed off, the lost spelunkers, the whispers in the dark. What if this was the end? What if we became just another tale of the cave? No, Sarah cried, gripping my arm tightly. We're not here to stay. We're not your prisoners. The creature's laughter reverberated through the cavern, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. Prisoners? Oh no, my dear. You will be my guests for eternity. With a sudden movement, it lunged at us, and instinct kicked in. Run! I screamed, yanking Sarah's arm as we sprinted back toward the tunnel, desperation fueling our flight. As we dashed through the narrow passage, the cave shuddered violently, rocks crumbling and dust filling the air. The whispers swirled around us, louder and more frantic. Stay, forever, join us. I couldn't focus on the voices. My mind was racing with fear and urgency. We had to escape. We had to find a way out. Where is the exit? Sarah gasped, her breath coming in ragged bursts as we navigated the twisting paths. I don't know. Just keep moving. I shouted back, my heart thundering in my chest. The darkness seemed to stretch endlessly, and every shadow felt alive, watching us, waiting. But we couldn't stop. Suddenly, the ground shook violently beneath us, and the tunnel erupted in a shower of stones. I stumbled, falling hard against the wall, and Sarah fell beside me. Get up, I urged, pulling her to her feet. But before we could take another step, the cave groaned ominously. I could feel the walls closing in, and I knew we had to move. Back this way, I shouted, dragging Sarah with me down a side tunnel that led to a smaller chamber. As we stumbled inside, I caught my breath, my heart pounding like a drum. The chamber was dimly lit by the faint glow of the fungi, casting eerie shadows on the walls. We can't keep running, Sarah said, her voice trembling. We need a plan. I nodded, trying to think through the panic. Maybe we can find a way to distract it, or trap it. Or maybe we can seal the entrance behind us, she suggested, glancing nervously back at the way we had come. No, we can't seal ourselves in, I replied, shaking my head. We have to keep moving. There has to be a way out. Suddenly, I remembered the stories of the cave's history, the myths of a hidden exit, a place where the spirits of the lost could finally escape. What if we find that exit? I suggested. But how? We don't even know where it is. Maybe we can find a clue in the markings, I said, gesturing to the symbols on the walls. They might tell us something. We turned our attention to the ancient symbols, studying them closely. My pulse quickened as I traced the lines with my fingers. The markings seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and I felt an unsettling energy in the air. What do they mean? Sarah asked, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know, but they feel important, I replied, trying to suppress the rising dread. As we examined the symbols, the growl erupted again, this time echoing through the chamber with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Join us, forever, it whispered, an insidious promise laced with terror. I could feel the creature closing in, its presence suffocating. We had to act fast. Look! I exclaimed, pointing to a cluster of symbols that seemed to shine brighter than the others. Maybe that's the key. We approached the glowing symbols cautiously, and I could feel a strange energy thrumming in the air. What if it's a trap? Sarah whispered, fear lacing her voice. It could be our only hope, I said, swallowing hard as I placed my hand on the glowing symbols. As my fingers touched the markings, a surge of energy coursed through me, and the chamber shook violently. I staggered back, but the symbols glowed brighter, illuminating the darkness. "Stay away!" I yelled, pulling Sarah back as the walls trembled. The growl rose to a deafening roar, the darkness swirling around us like a storm. I could see the creature in the corner of my eye, its grotesque form emerging from the shadows, but the light from the symbols pushed it back. "Keep your hand there," Sarah urged, her eyes wide with fear. "It's working." The creature shrieked, a sound that cut through the air like a knife, and I felt the energy building around us. "Together," I shouted, urging Sarah to join me. We both pressed our hands against the glowing symbols, and a blinding light erupted, enveloping us in its warmth. The whispers turned to screams, and I felt the cave tremble with rage. Then, everything went dark. The curse of the old bridge. Have you ever felt an inexplicable chill run down your spine, even on the warmest of days? Have you ever sensed a presence watching you, only to turn around and find nothing but empty air? If so, then you might understand the terror that gripped our small town of Oakville, nestled in the heart of rural America. My name is Sarah Thompson, and this is the story of how an old bridge turned our peaceful community into a living nightmare. It all began on a crisp autumn morning in September 2022. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting our town in a palette of reds, oranges, and golds. I remember waking up that day feeling oddly refreshed, which was unusual for me. As a 32-year-old journalist for the local newspaper, the Oakville Gazette, I was used to late nights and early mornings. But that day was different. Little did I know that it would mark the beginning of a series of events that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I made my way downstairs, the old wooden steps creaking beneath my feet. The house I lived in was a Victorian-style home that had been in my family for generations. It was charming, with its intricate woodwork and large bay windows, but it also had a way of amplifying every little sound. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard my phone buzz on the kitchen counter. It was my best friend and colleague, Mike Reynolds. "Sarah, you need to get down to the old Willow Creek Bridge right now," Mike's voice crackled through the speaker, urgency evident in his tone. "Something's happened. The police are everywhere." My journalistic instincts kicked in immediately. "I'm on my way," I replied, grabbing my coat and car keys. The old Willow Creek Bridge had been a fixture in our town for over a century. It was a simple stone structure that spanned the creek, connecting the two halves of Oakville. Locals often joked that it was held together more by tradition than mortar at this point. As I drove through the quiet streets of Oakville, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual morning bustle was subdued, and those who were out seemed to be moving with an air of caution. When I arrived at the bridge, the scene that greeted me was surreal. Police cars with flashing lights lined both sides of the road, and yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze. I spotted Mike near the edge of the crowd that had gathered. His face was pale, and his hands shook slightly as he clutched his camera. "What's going on?" I asked as I approached him. Mike turned to me, his eyes wide. "It's John Carpenter. He's gone missing." John Carpenter was Oakville's beloved high school history teacher. He was in his 50s, with a kind face and a passion for local lore. Everyone in town knew him, and the idea that he could just vanish seemed impossible. "Missing? How? When?" I fired off questions, my reporter's notebook already in hand. Mike shook his head. "That's the thing, Sarah. Nobody knows. He was last seen walking across this bridge last night around 9 p.m. A couple of teenagers saw him halfway across, and then, nothing. It's like he vanished into thin air. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. That's impossible. People don't just disappear. As I spoke those words, I noticed an old man standing at the edge of the crowd. He was staring at me intently, his rheumy eyes filled with a mixture of fear and knowing. Slowly, he approached us, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the pavement. "You're wrong, miss," he said, his voice quavering with age. "People do disappear on this bridge. They have been for years. We just don't talk about it." Mike and I exchanged glances. This was the first we heard of any such thing. "What do you mean, sir?" I asked gently. The old man looked around nervously before leaning in closer. "It's the man in the hat. He takes them. Been doing it for decades. My own brother, His voice trailed off, and he shook his head as if to clear away painful memories. "Who is this man in the hat?" Mike pressed, his camera forgotten at his side. "Nobody knows," the old man whispered. "He appears on foggy nights. Tall, dressed all in black, with a wide-brimmed hat that hides his face. Those who see him, they're never seen again." I felt a shiver run down my spine. It sounded like something out of an urban legend, yet the old man's fear seemed genuine. Before I could ask any more questions, a commotion near the bridge caught our attention. We found something, an officer called out. Mike and I rushed forward, our journalistic instincts overriding any sense of caution. As we approached the center of the bridge, I saw what had caused the excitement. There, caught between two stones, was a scrap of fabric. It was from a tweed jacket, the kind John Carpenter always wore. As I stared at that small piece of cloth, a gust of wind swept across the bridge. For a moment, just a split second, I thought I saw a tall, dark figure at the far end of the bridge. But when I blinked, it was gone. Little did I know that this was just the beginning. The disappearance of John Carpenter would set in motion a chain of events that would expose the dark secrets of Oakville and force us to confront terrors beyond our wildest nightmares. The curse of the old bridge had awakened, and none of us were safe. As the days passed, the disappearance of John Carpenter cast a long shadow over Oakville. The police investigation turned up nothing concrete, and the town was abuzz with whispered theories and barely concealed fear. I threw myself into researching the bridge's history, determined to find some rational explanation for what had happened. The Oakville Library was a treasure trove of local history, housed in a grand old building that smelled of dust and aged paper. I spent hours poring over yellow newspapers and faded documents, searching for any mention of previous disappearances or strange occurrences at the Willow Creek Bridge. It was on my third day of research that I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. In a brittle newspaper from 1924, I found a small article tucked away on page 6. Local man vanishes on Willow Creek Bridge. William Hawthorne, age 35, was reported missing by his wife yesterday evening. Mr. Hawthorne was last seen crossing the Willow Creek Bridge at dusk. Witnesses report a strange fog and a tall figure in a hat on the bridge at the time of his disappearance. Anyone with information is urged to contact the sheriff's office. My hand shook as I read the article. The similarities to John's disappearance were uncanny. I quickly scanned through more old newspapers and found 5 more reports of disappearances on the bridge, each decades apart, each mentioning a fog and a mysterious figure. As I left the library that evening, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and purple. The streets were unusually quiet for that time of day. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a tall man in a hat, but there was no one there. That night, I tossed and turned in my bed, unable to sleep. Every creak of the old house made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and decided to write up my findings. As I sat at my desk, the lamp casting a warm glow around my room, I heard a noise from outside. It was a soft tapping sound, like someone gently knocking on glass. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I turned towards my window. Through the sheer curtains, I could make out a dark shape. It was tall, impossibly tall, and it seemed to be wearing a wide-brimmed hat. I blinked hard, convinced I was seeing things. When I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. But the tapping continued, now coming from downstairs. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and called Mike. "Sarah, do you have any idea what time it is?" Mike's voice was groggy with sleep. "Mike, I think there's someone outside my house," I whispered, fear making my voice quaver. I heard rustling on the other end of the line as Mike sat up. "What? Are you sure?" I think I saw the man in the hat," I said, feeling foolish even as the words left my mouth. There was a pause, then Mike said, "I'm coming over. Don't move, okay?" As I waited for Mike to arrive, I huddled in my room, every sense on high alert. The tapping had stopped, but the silence was almost worse. When I heard a car pull up outside, I nearly cried with relief. Mike arrived with a police officer in tow. They searched the house and the surrounding area but found nothing out of place. The officer suggested it might have been a tree branch tapping against the window, but I knew what I had seen. The next morning, exhausted and jittery from lack of sleep, I met Mike at our favorite coffee shop, The Grind. As we sat in a cozy booth, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air, I showed him my research. "This can't be a coincidence," I said, spreading out the photocopied newspaper articles. 6 disappearances over the past 100 years, all on the same bridge, all with the same description of a tall man in a hat. Mike frowned as he looked over the articles. "It's creepy, I'll give you that. But Sarah, you can't seriously believe in some supernatural explanation, can you?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Mike. All I know is that people are disappearing, and it's connected to that bridge somehow." As we talked, I noticed an elderly woman at a nearby table watching us intently. When she caught my eye, she slowly got up and made her way over to our booth. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quavering slightly. "I couldn't help but overhear. Are you talking about the Willow Creek Bridge?" Mike and I exchanged glances before I nodded. "Yes, we are. Do you know something about it?" The woman's eyes darted around nervously before she slid into the booth next to me. "My name is Eleanor Blackwood. My grandfather, he was one of them. One of the ones who disappeared on that bridge." I felt a chill run down my spine. "When did this happen, Mrs. Blackwood?" 1952, she replied, her eyes taking on a faraway look. "I was just a little girl, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Grandpa was walking me home from school. We were halfway across the bridge when this fog rolled out of nowhere. It was so thick, I could barely see my hand in front of my face." Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. "That's when I saw him. A tall man in a black coat and hat, standing at the end of the bridge. Grandpa saw him too. He pushed me behind him and told me to run home as fast as I could. I did, but when I looked back, both Grandpa and the man in the hat were gone. Mike leaned forward, his skepticism warring with curiosity. Did you tell the police about the man you saw? Eleanor nodded. Of course. But they didn't believe me. Said I was just a frightened child with an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw. As Eleanor spoke, I felt a strange sensation, as if the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees. I glanced towards the window and froze. There, across the street, standing perfectly still amidst the moving pedestrians, was a tall figure in a black coat and wide-brimmed hat. Mike, I whispered, my voice tight with fear. Look. Mike turned, but at that moment, a truck passed by, momentarily blocking our view. When it had gone, the figure had vanished. Eleanor followed our gaze, her face paling. You saw him, didn't you? She asked, her voice barely audible. He's watching you now. Just like he watched me all those years ago. As Eleanor's words sank in, I realized that our investigation had taken a dark turn. We weren't just chasing a story anymore. We had caught the attention of something ancient and malevolent. The curse of the old bridge was real, and it had set its sights on us. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and increasingly bizarre occurrences. Mike and I threw ourselves into the investigation, determined to uncover the truth behind the Willow Creek Bridge disappearances. But the more we dug, the stranger things became. We started by interviewing Eleanor Blackwood again, this time at her quaint little house on the outskirts of town. As we sat in her living room, surrounded by old photographs and the ticking of an antique grandfather clock, she shared more details about her grandfather's disappearance. There's something I didn't tell you before, Eleanor said, her hands trembling as she poured us tea. After Grandpa vanished, I started having dreams. Terrible dreams. I leaned forward, my recorder running. What kind of dreams, Mrs. Blackwood? She closed her eyes, as if visualizing a painful memory. I would see Grandpa on the bridge, calling out to me. But when I tried to reach him, the man in the hat would appear. He never showed his face, but I could feel him smiling. It was wrong. Like his smile was too wide for a human face. Mike and I exchanged glances. It sounded fantastical, but the fear in Eleanor's voice was palpable. Did the dreams ever stop? Mike asked gently. Eleanor shook her head. They faded over time, but they never truly stopped. Even now, all these years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like I've just escaped from that bridge. As we left Eleanor's house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. What do you think? I asked Mike as we walked to the car. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, Sarah. It's all so incredible. But Eleanor seemed genuinely terrified. Over the next few days, we interviewed other longtime residents of Oakville. Many were reluctant to talk at first, but as word spread about our investigation, people began coming forward with their own stories. There was old Tom from the hardware store, who claimed his father had seen the man in the hat back in the 30s. Martha Johnson, the retired librarian, told us about strange noises she'd heard coming from the bridge late at night. And then there was Joey, a teenager who swore he'd seen a tall, shadowy figure standing on the bridge just a week before John Carpenter disappeared. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, but the full picture remained frustratingly out of reach. What was the connection between the man in the hat and the disappearances? Why did he only appear every few decades? And most importantly, What had happened to John Carpenter and the others who had vanished? As our investigation progressed, I began to notice strange things happening around me. It started small objects moving when I wasn't looking, shadows flickering in the corner of my eye. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just stress and lack of sleep playing tricks on my mind. But then came the night that changed everything. I was working late at the Gazette office, poring over old town records I managed to unearth. The office was empty, the only sound the gentle hum of my computer and the occasional car passing on the street outside. As I leafed through a dusty folder, a photo slipped out and fluttered to the floor. I bent to pick it up and froze. It was an old black and white image of the Willow Creek Bridge, dated 1900. But it wasn't the bridge that caught my attention, it was the figure standing on it. Tall, dressed in black, with a wide-brimmed hat. My heart pounding, I flipped the photo over. On the back, in faded handwriting, was a single sentence, "He waits for those who cross." A chill ran down my spine. I quickly gathered my things, suddenly desperate to leave the empty office. As I hurried down the dark hallway towards the exit, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Coming from behind me. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in short gasps. The footsteps sped up too, growing louder. I could hear the tap of a cane on the hard floor, steady and rhythmic. I burst out of the building into the cool night air, not daring to look back. I ran to my car, fumbling with my keys. As I finally got the door open and threw myself inside, I caught a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror. A tall figure, standing at the entrance of the Gazette building. And though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was smiling that too wide smile. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I finally made it inside my house, I double-checked all the locks and drew all the curtains. Sleep was out of the question. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, the photograph from the office spread out before me. As I stared at the enigmatic figure on the bridge, a realization slowly dawned on me. This wasn't just a local ghost story or a series of tragic accidents. There was something ancient and malevolent at work in Oakville, something that had been taking people for over a century. And now, it knew we were looking for it. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my windows, I made a decision. It was time to visit the Willow Creek Bridge ourselves. Whatever secrets it held, whatever danger lurked there, we needed to face it head on. I picked up my phone and dialed Mike's number. When he answered, groggy with sleep, I said, "Mike, we need to go to the bridge. Tonight." There was a long pause before he replied, "Are you sure about this, Sarah?" I looked at the photograph again, at the figure that had haunted Oakville for generations. "I'm sure," I said. "It's time we found out the truth." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were approaching a point of no return. The curse of the old bridge had already claimed so many. I just prayed that we wouldn't be next. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every tick of the clock seemed to echo in my mind, a countdown to our midnight rendezvous with the unknown. I tried to keep busy, double-checking our equipment and going over our plan, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the figure in the photograph and the footsteps I'd heard in the Gazette office. As dusk fell, a thick fog began to roll in from the creek, blanketing the town in a ghostly shroud. It was as if Oakville itself was holding its breath, waiting for what the night would bring. Mike arrived at my house just before 11:30 p.m., his face a mask of determination tinged with fear. We loaded our gear into his car in silence, cameras, voice recorders, flashlights, and a first aid kit, just in case. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Sarah?" Mike asked as we pulled out of my driveway. We could still call it off, wait for daylight. I shook my head, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. We have to do this, Mike. For John, for Eleanor's grandfather, for all the others who've disappeared. We need to know the truth. The drive to Willow Creek Bridge was eerily quiet. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to mere feet in front of the car. As we approached the bridge, I felt a sense of dread settling in the pit of my stomach. We parked a short distance away and gathered our equipment. The old stone bridge loomed before us, a dark silhouette against the misty night. The only sound was the gentle burble of the creek below and the pounding of my own heart. "Okay," I whispered, checking that my camera was recording. "Let's do this." We stepped onto the bridge, our flashlights cutting weak paths through the fog. Every step felt heavy, as if the very air was trying to hold us back. We reached the midpoint of the bridge and paused, looking around nervously. "Now what?" Mike asked, his voice barely audible above the sound of rushing water below. Before I could answer, a cold wind whipped across the bridge, causing us both to stumble. The fog swirled around us, thickening until I could barely see Mike standing right next to me. "Mike?" I called out, panic rising in my voice. "Mike, where are you?" "I'm right here." His voice came from somewhere to my left. "Sarah, I think we should dash." His words were cut off by a sudden, bone-chilling sound. It was like a sigh, but deeper, older, as if the bridge itself was exhaling. And then, through the fog, I saw it. A tall figure, standing at the far end of the bridge. It wore a long black coat and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured its face. But even without seeing its features, I could feel its gaze fixed upon us. "Mike," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Do you see Dash?" "I see it," he replied, his tone a mixture of awe and terror. Slowly, with a grace that seemed almost inhuman, the figure began to move towards us. Each step was accompanied by the tap of a cane on stone, a sound that echoed in my nightmares. I raised my camera, determined to capture evidence of what we were seeing. But as I looked through the viewfinder, my blood ran cold. The figure didn't appear on the screen. It was as if I was filming an empty bridge. "It's not showing up," I hissed to Mike. "The camera can't see it." Mike fumbled with his own camera, but judging by his frustrated grunt, he was having the same problem. The figure was getting closer now, close enough that I should have been able to make out its features. But where a face should have been, there was only shadow and that terrible, two-eyed smile. Suddenly, Mike grabbed my arm. "Sarah, we need to get out of here. Now!" We turned to run, but the fog had become so thick that I could barely see where I was putting my feet. I stumbled, nearly falling, and felt Mike's hand slip from my arm. "Mike!" I screamed, reaching out blindly. But there was no answer. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the mist. "Mike! Where are you?" The tapping sound was getting closer. Tap, 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 like a clock counting down the seconds I had left. In desperation, I began to run, not caring which direction I was going as long as it was away from that sound. My foot caught on something and I fell hard, my camera clattering across the stone bridge. As I lay there, winded and terrified, I heard the tapping stop right next to me. Slowly, I looked up. The figure stood over me, its face still hidden in shadow. But I could see its smile, a gash of light in the darkness, far too wide to be human. It reached out a hand, pale and skeletal, towards me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. As its cold fingers brushed my forehead, the world around me began to fade. The last thing I remember is a voice, ancient and terrible, whispering in my ear, "Welcome to the other side, Sarah Thompson." And then, darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I was lying on the cold stone of the bridge, the early morning sun peeking through the dissipating fog. Mike was kneeling beside me, his face pale with worry. "Sarah, thank God you're awake. I've been trying to wake you for hours." I sat up slowly, my head pounding. What happened? The man in the hat, did you see him?" Mike looked at me strangely. "Sarah, there was no one else on the bridge. You ran off into the fog, and when I found you, you were passed out right here." I stared at him in disbelief. But I saw him. He was right here. He touched me." Mike helped me to my feet, his expression a mixture of concern and skepticism. "Maybe it was a dream? You hit your head pretty hard when you fell." But I knew it wasn't a dream. It had been too real, too vivid. As we gathered our equipment and prepared to leave the bridge, a glint of something caught my eye. There, lying on the stone where I had fallen, was a single black feather. I picked it up with trembling fingers, a chill running down my spine. Whatever had happened on the bridge last night, whatever force was behind the disappearances, I knew one thing for certain. Our investigation was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The days following our midnight encounter on the bridge were a blur of confusion, fear, and relentless questioning. Mike remained skeptical about what had happened, convinced that our experience was nothing more than a combination of fear, fog, and overactive imaginations. But I knew better. The black feather I had found on the bridge was proof that something otherworldly had occurred that night. I became obsessed with uncovering the truth. My apartment walls were soon covered with timelines, photographs, and newspaper clippings, all connected by red string in a complex web of theories and possibilities. I barely ate or slept, fueled by a mixture of caffeine and determination. It was during one of my late-night research sessions that I stumbled upon a crucial piece of information. In an old town registry from the late 1800s, I found a name that made my blood run cold: Jeremiah Blackwood, Eleanor's great-grandfather. According to the records, Jeremiah had been a prominent figure in Oakville's early days. He was a wealthy businessman who had funded the construction of the Willow Creek Bridge. But there was something else, a detail that sent shivers down my spine. Jeremiah had been known for always wearing a black coat and a wide-brimmed hat. With trembling hands, I dialed Eleanor's number, not caring about the late hour. "Mrs. Blackwood," I said when she answered, my voice tight with urgency. "I need to talk to you about your great-grandfather, Jeremiah." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Eleanor finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You've figured it out, haven't you?" The next morning, I found myself sitting once again in Eleanor's living room. This time, however, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken truths and long-buried secrets. Jeremiah Blackwood wasn't just the man who built the bridge, Eleanor began, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere in the distance. He was also a practitioner of dark arts, obsessed with the idea of cheating death. She went on to explain how Jeremiah had incorporated occult symbols and rituals into the bridge's construction, turning it into a kind of gateway between our world and something else. "But the magic came with a price," Eleanor continued, her voice quavering. "Every few decades, the bridge demands a sacrifice. A life to maintain the boundary between worlds. I felt a chill run down my spine as the pieces began to fall into place. And the man in the hat? The figure we've all seen? Eleanor nodded sadly. That's Jeremiah. Or what's left of him. Trapped between worlds, forced to collect the souls the bridge requires. As I left Eleanor's house, my mind was reeling from the implications of what I'd learned. The curse of the old bridge wasn't just real, it was far more terrible than I could have imagined. I spent the next few days corroborating Eleanor's story, digging through old records and occult texts. Everything I found seemed to support her claims. The disappearances, the sightings of the man in the hat, it all fit into a pattern that spanned over a century. But knowledge, I soon discovered, came with its own danger. It started with small things at first. Objects in my apartment moving while I wasn't looking. Strange whispers just at the edge of hearing. Shadows flickering in my peripheral vision. Then came the dreams. Night after night, I found myself on the Willow Creek Bridge, facing the tall figure in the hat. Each time, he would reach out to me with those skeletal fingers, that two-eyed smile gleaming in the darkness. And each time, I would wake up gasping for air, the phantom touch of cold fingers lingering on my skin. I knew I was running out of time. Whatever force was at work, it was aware of my investigation and was closing in. I had to find a way to break the curse before I became its next victim. In desperation, I turned to the one person who might be able to help Eleanor Blackwood. As the last living descendant of Jeremiah, she was my only link to the magic that had created this nightmare. Together, we pored over Jeremiah's old journals, searching for any clue that might lead to a solution. It was Eleanor who finally found a ritual that could potentially close the gateway and end the curse once and for all. But there was a catch. The ritual had to be performed on the bridge, at midnight, during the full moon. And it required a willing sacrifice, someone to take Jeremiah's place as the guardian of the boundary. As I read the requirements, I knew what I had to do. It had to be me. I was already marked by the curse, already half-trapped between worlds. If there was a chance to save Oakville, to prevent any more disappearances, I had to take it. Mike tried to talk me out of it when I told him my plan. He begged me to reconsider, to find another way. But in the end, he understood. This was bigger than just us now. On the night of the full moon, Mike drove me to the bridge. The air was thick with fog, just like it had been on that fateful night weeks ago. As I stepped out of the car, I could feel the weight of what I was about to do settling on my shoulders. Are you sure about this? Mike asked one last time, his voice choked with emotion. I nodded, trying to put on a brave face. It's the only way, Mike. Promise me you'll tell our story. Make sure people know the truth. With a final hug, I turned and walked onto the bridge. The fog swirled around me, and I could hear the faint tapping of a cane on stone. As I reached the center of the bridge, I saw him. Jeremiah Blackwood, the man in the hat, standing before me with that terrible smile. I've been waiting for you, Sarah Thompson, he said, his voice like the rustling of dead leaves. I know, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm here to end this. To set you free. I began the ritual, my voice rising above the sound of the rushing water below. As I spoke the final words, I felt a great force building around me. The air crackled with energy, and the bridge beneath my feet began to tremble. Jeremiah's form began to waver, like a mirage in the desert. For a moment, I saw not the monstrous figure that had haunted Oakville for generations, but a tired old man, weighed down by the burden of his own hubris. Thank you, he whispered, and then he was gone. The energy reached a crescendo, and I felt myself being lifted off my feet. In that moment, suspended between earth and sky, I saw everything. The past, the present, the future all laid out before me like a vast tapestry. I saw John Carpenter and all the others who had disappeared over the years. They were at peace now, free from the limbo that had held them for so long. I saw Oakville, free from the shadow that had hung over it for generations. The curse was broken, the gateway closed. And I saw myself, transformed. No longer fully human, but something else. The new guardian of the boundary, keeper of the balance between worlds. As the energy subsided, I felt my feet touch the ground once more. But I knew I was no longer the Sarah Thompson who had walked onto this bridge. I had become something more, something other. I turned to see Mike running towards me, his face a mixture of relief and disbelief. But as he got closer, I saw his expression change to one of awe and a touch of fear. "Sarah," he called out uncertainly. I smiled at him, feeling the weight of my new role settling upon me. "It's done, Mike," I said, my voice echoing with a power I didn't fully understand. "The curse is broken. Oakville is safe." As dawn broke over Willow Creek Bridge, I knew that my journey was just beginning. I had traded one life for another, becoming a guardian of the threshold between worlds. It was a heavy responsibility, but one I had chosen willingly. The curse of the old bridge was indeed broken. But in its place, a new legend was born, the legend of the woman who walks between worlds, protecting the boundary between the seen and the unseen. And so, dear listener, if you ever find yourself crossing an old stone bridge on a foggy night and you feel a presence watching you, don't be afraid. It's just me, Sarah Thompson, the guardian of Willow Creek Bridge, keeping watch over the boundary between our world and the next. Remember, some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. But for those who dare to seek the truth, who are willing to face the darkness, there are wonders and terrors beyond imagining. The curse of the old bridge may be gone, but its legacy lives on. In the whispers of the wind, in the shadows of the night, and in the stories we tell to remind ourselves that there is more to this world than what meets the eye. And who knows? Perhaps one day, you too will find yourself standing at the threshold of the unknown, faced with a choice that will change your life forever. When that day comes, remember the story of Willow Creek Bridge and choose wisely. For in the end, it is our choices that define us, that shape the world around us, and that determine which side of the boundary we will call home. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.